And not only that, but I bet you anything right now, every hotel in Paris, I hope so, because and they cleaned up their husband because
I like that.
She was actually one of the original.
Yes, but I can't. I
oh
don't
my
know.
God. I loved the night. We were only there for 3 nights because we did Amsterdam one evening, and then we did
Starting in the 80s.
so we took 2015 little.
Yeah, he was hired after shooting.
The one that all the way Lewis, she's out and yeah, they'll probably do that.
It was just.
I was able to send you that email.
So was the wastewater
By the time I got a chance to talk to her. Well, the applicant is here, so he can at least he can speak to it. Okay, good, thank you. It's not very long.
It's a long story.
You want to know between 6 and 7. Yeah, we don't want to miss. Yes. Okay.
Yeah, I thought that they were good. But I'm telling you, those guys.
Everyone ready? Time ready? All right, everybody, welcome to the October 5th regular Planning Commission hearing. We're going to start off with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you very much. Ty, reporting on posting the agenda and roll call, please.
Yes, Chair. The agenda was posted on September 28th at 8:01 p.m. Commissioner Ellie?
Present.
Thank you. Commissioner Fuzikatsu?
Present.
Commissioner Leongard?
Here.
Thank you. Commissioner Lewis is absent. Commissioner Ramirez?
Here.
Vice Chair Kushner? Here. And Chair Bandel?
Here. Ty, are there any public comments for items not on the agenda today?
I received no speaker cards at this time.
All right, thank you. Consent agenda. Commissioners, any questions, comments, concerns on the meeting minutes from the last meeting? I don't see any. I'll make a motion that we accept.
Any discussion? No?
If I can just remind the commissioners, turn on your microphone when you're speaking, and then turn it off. Thank you.
This can be digital vote, but I can also do roll call if you would like me to.
Digital is just fine if everyone's good with that.
I'm
Vice
just
Chair,
waiting for
just-
Commissioner Kushner.
Vice Chair?
Would you like to vote? How would you like to vote?
It's not on our screen, Ty.
Oh, let me just ask, which one would you like? Aye, nay. How would you like to vote? Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right, moving on to... It did, yes. 5-0.
5-0?
Yes. 1, 2, 3. Foot. Yeah. All right, moving on to public hearing 6.1. It's a continued item, proposed architect and site review for E&P Properties, new warehouse building 201 and 221 Yamain Drive, application AS 22-16.
Good evening, Chair and Commissioners. Just to remind you what this project is, it's a request by E&P Properties for an architectural site review approval of an approximate 163,400 square foot warehousing, large-scale warehousing and light industrial building on an 8.88 acre site. Okay. This site is bordered on the north by West Branch Yagas Creek, to the south by industrial uses, on the east by industrial uses, and to the west by the railroad tracks and Monterey Highway, and then further beyond that to the west by commercial and industrial uses. The Planning Commission considered this project at your September 7th Commission meeting, and at that meeting you expressed some concerns, decided to continue the project. The specific concerns related to the appearance of the western side of the building, which is this building side that is adjacent to the railroad tracks and Monterey Highway. And you focused on two issues. One was the landscape buffer on the western side of the building, and the second was the building massing. And that was specifically related to the applicant's request for a minor deviation to increase the building height from 35 feet to 40 feet. Now, at the request of one of the planning commissioners, I did send you late this afternoon or evening some information related to the applicant's minor deviation request. I don't know if you've had a chance to review that, but the applicant is here and his team is here to answer any questions you have related to that issue. So I'm going to take each of these issues separately. The first is the landscape buffer. The planning commissioners expressed a desire to increase the landscaping along the western side of the boundary. The original plan includes a large landscaping buffer on the northern side of the property, and this is integrated with stormwater management planting, but also includes several large trees. There is a landscape buffer on the northern end of the building, 3 finger planters along the side of the building, and then another planter at the southern end of the building, and then a landscape planter on the southern end of the site, and which of course extends all the way across the frontage. The applicant has augmented that existing landscape proposal with 4 additional finger planters along the western side of the building. This did displace some parking, so that parking was moved over to the eastern side of the site. The landscape planters are proposed to be 9 feet wide with a minimum interior dimension of 8 feet and 16 feet long. The parking that's been displaced has been moved, and the applicant proposes to plant 24-inch box Chinese pistache trees along this western side of the building. At initial planting, those trees will be approximately 10 feet high and 5 feet wide. But at full maturity, which is expected to be 12 to 15 years, the height will be 30 to 60 feet, and the tree canopy is expected to provide significant screening. And I'm going to show that to you when I show you the rendering related to the second issue, which is building massing. The planning commissioners discussed the height of the building and the applicant's request for a minor deviation to allow the building to be increased from 35 feet high to 40 feet high. And the applicant has stated that the requesting building height is required to allow an interior clear height of 32 feet. The applicant further stated that a 32-foot clear height is the current minimum industry standard for warehousing users. The applicant has provided these renderings that show the western building elevation at both the 35-foot high building and 40-foot high building. And let me just go to that. This is the rendering showing the building at 35 feet high, and this is from a vantage point along Monterey Street where the future, there's property zoned R4, currently has commercial and industrial development. But at some point in the future, we hope that it will be redeveloped with apartment uses. And this is the vantage point from that point, which is approximately 180 feet away. And this is the rendering of the building at 40 feet high. So the renderings do show that the building would be nearly completely screened by the trees at both heights, and that the 40-foot height is not significantly different from the 35-foot height in terms of its visual impact from Monterey Street. The applicant and his team are here to answer any questions related to these two issues that you brought up at the last meeting. At this time, staff is recommending that the Planning Commission, based on its independent analysis, determine this project is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to State CEQA Guidelines Section 15168, projects within the scope of a program EIR, and 15183, projects consistent with the community plan or zoning, and adopt a resolution approving proposed architectural and site review permit application AS 22-16. So, and I'm available to answer questions, but also, as I mentioned, the applicant's team is here to answer questions related to what they're proposing.
Thank you, Melissa.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much for that, and thank you for the additional renderings. That's very helpful. What you sent this afternoon, is that what you just covered, or is there something else that was sent? I didn't have a chance to see.
It is the applicant's justification for requesting the minor deviation, which would allow a building height increase from 35 feet to 40 feet. So I got the request today, and I sent it out today, but you did get the material late. But the applicant and his team is here to answer questions related to that, so
Okay,
I'm hoping that they can provide you with the information that you need.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions, Commissioner?
Yeah, I have a question about the trees. The Chinese pistache, it's the female plant is an invasive species. Can we have some language that it'll be a male plant?
Yeah, I don't see why we couldn't. We could add that into the
Okay.
resolution.
And the grevillea, that's also a very toxic plant. Can we have a different a plant tree for that as well?
I'm sorry, which one was it?
It's spelled Greville.
Okay. I will have the applicant speak to this, but if there's another, I'm sure there are other species that they can use that will provide the same kind of coverage, and that wouldn't be toxic. So,
Yeah, I'm not opposed to the Chinese pistache as long as it's a male.
okay.
The city has a list of trees that's allowed. Maybe
No.
They do.
No, we don't have a list of trees that are allowed. We have a list of trees that we use in on public landscape strips, but on private property, we don't limit the trees usually, except when they are adjacent to a channel, and then the water district looks at the plans, and they have done that in this case, and they make sure that there are non-invasive species because that's a concern of theirs
I was
as well.
going to say to use that as a reference because there is they did the research and check for all kind of problems. Maybe you can just use that as a guideline.
The water district's list?
Yeah.
Okay, sure.
Any other questions, comments for the applicant? No? All right. I'm going to move it to open public hearing. Ty, is there any speaker cards?
No speaker cards, Chair.
Excuse me, sir. Are you?
I'm sorry, did you guys have questions that you wanted us to address? I thought that's what you asked.
Are you the?
Yeah, I'm with the applicant.
Got it. I'm going to close public hearing.
I think you should open the public hearing and let him speak as part of the public hearing.
Sorry, I didn't mean to jump the gun.
It's a little confusing.
Sure,
That's
okay.
a better way to do it.
All right, well, I'm going to reopen public hearing, and
Okay.
this gentleman can speak. You have,
So that's my question, but is part of the applicant then, doesn't he have like more time? He shouldn't be in public hearing and he shouldn't be limited to 3 minutes.
That is correct. Normally, in other times, we give them 10 minutes to the applicant, but it's up to you, and it sounds like you have some specific questions for him, so. we should
Did I
just
get up
find
out
a
of
way.
turn? I'm sorry.
No, it's very confusing
You're
even for
good.
us, so please don't worry.
My name is Jeff Lenhart. I'm a principal architect at RMW Architecture Interiors. I'm the managing partner of the Sacramento studio, working on the project on behalf of E&P Properties. Thank you for hearing us today. To the chair and all the members, glad to be here. Happy to answer any questions you have, and I'm here to answer anything you've got for me. So,
Quick question about the placement of the trees. Given other properties that are along there, obviously they've got some ragtag types of trees that they have along in existence already. Is there a reason, though, why, in order to better screen the building, the trees were not put closer to the road and provide, because it is closer, you would have more screening?
yeah, the way the site is, thank you for that question. The way the site is laid out, we have limited space along the railroad frontage there, and we're using all of it for our bioretention and stormwater management, and which then required us to put all of the landscape screening elements up against the building. And when we heard from planning, who we worked with extensively, that the request had come in that further enhanced landscaping be provided, we doubled the amount of finger planters, the amount of trees, in an effort to try to mitigate that concern. And we could use probably any trees you want. We tried to pick the best combination of large deciduous shade tree that will shade the parking lot and satisfy the shading requirements. But I'm not convinced that that's the only choice of tree that we use. Deciduous trees generally work better because they give you the shade in the summer and allow a little more heat in the winter. There aren't a whole lot of, we talked to our landscape architect earlier today about this, there's not a whole lot of really good evergreen choices. They just don't perform and live very well. So the deciduous family is better, but I'm not convinced that we're locked into that particular tree species.
But more specifically, architecturally, on the other side of the building, you have the roadway going up against the building, whereas on the other side, you have the roadway going up against the property line or the retention area. But if it was flipped like the other side, you would end up having space to have a green space to plant in, would you not?
Right. I guess we were also trying to mitigate the requirement for the truck scale that they need on site, which needs to be moved out of the driveway, which then allowed us, it made more sense to put the parking on the opposite side of the drive aisle from the building. So a little bit different requirement, and it drove that.
Okay.
That kind of brings up a question that I had that I forgot. This might be both for Melissa and yourself. So for for that west side, is it possible to move the parking completely to the west and then bring the trucks closer to the building after they make that turn, and then the trees could be planted there?
That's a great question. We looked at that early on. We wanted to keep the truck scale away from the public roadway. The truck scale can't exist in common with the drive aisle.
Sorry, just not the truck scale side, not the east side, the west side.
Right. If we were to move the parking that's along the east side to the west side, then it would require us to shift everything to the east, and then the truck scale would be in the driveway, which we can't do for circulation purposes. It would create a problem.
So
from a
it wouldn't
circulation
be possible for the trucks to make that turn and then hug close to the building and then bring out and make that turn again.
It would be difficult because of the way that the trucks want to enter and circulate around the site requires them, well, for it to be effective, they want to circulate around the building in a counterclockwise orientation, which it's really hard to put the truck scale on the other side, because that means they're have to go all the way around the building to get to the truck scale, which then they have to do the loop twice.
I don't, it's fine. I don't think because I'm not saying move the truck scale at all.
All I'm saying is that because the truck scale is on the east side,
Right.
we could make it align with the parking on the east side. If we were to move that parking to the west side, then we have the problem of the driveway has to
No. The parking on the west side of the building. Could we put up the picture?
I'm sorry, did you mean that you would like to move the parking to the opposite side of the drive aisle?
Move the parking here. Set it on this side, hugged up against the building. Move the parking here. So when the trucks come around, then they come back and hug up against the building and go back around.
I think that we can.
Not touch any
No,
of this.
I'm with you now. Sorry, I misunderstood your question. I think that we could take the parking on that west side and flip it to the opposite side of the drive aisle and have the drive aisle closer to the building rather than farther from the building. In actuality, the trucks will never use that far west side because they'll come in counterclockwise around, and once they are into the docks, they'll come back out along the east side. They won't circulate around that way because it's not ideal.
That was going to be my next question because you seem to have a very imperative area there.
Right. So, yes, to answer your question, I think that we could flip the parking to the opposite side of the drive aisle.
And that would be okay for the fire department as well? If there's, I don't know those restrictions or those.
That is a good question. Actually, now that I think about it, the fire department does have a requirement, number one, for a 26-foot drive aisle, which we provided, but they have very strict requirements about the zone relative to the face of the building, both how close the drive aisle can be and how far it can be. And they want this sweet spot where their ladder can get up to the roof. And now that you mentioned it, if we move that drive aisle closer to the building, then they wouldn't be able to use that side for fire department ladder access. They may not have a problem with that because generally, as long as they have 2 or 3 sides to do that access, they're okay with it. But every jurisdiction and every fire department treats it a little bit different. I think that's why we ended up with the drive aisle a little farther with the parking up against the building. But we can confirm that. And if they would allow us to flip it, I don't think there's a consequence for the project from a functionality standpoint.
That would be wonderful. And then I had a concern if that was okay, then you might lose parking spaces. But then I remembered, and although we've learned in our training that what we've done with other projects are not precedences that, other developers could come in and say, well, you did it for this one and you did it for that one, I want it too. But we have done it in the past where we've had less parking than required because it was speculative of what was going in those other buildings. And I'm wondering, to be honest, I don't even know. We always say that there's like a 25% variation is acceptable. 25% variation would be 35 parking spots. And that's all of them on the left-hand side. So I don't know if we could do something like that for this project, maybe not 35 parking spots, but if there's 8 parking spots that there's no room for them anywhere and we can get those trees moved to the left, can we give them a variance on their parking?
Well, we're gaining the parking spots back if it's not, the new trees are not up against the building, right? Then all the space that was just created by moving the spots over on that side, now if the parking all goes over on that, you gain some of the spots back.
Agreed. But I'm saying in case there's, can we give a variance on parking is my question, Melissa. Say again?
Well, I do think that the Assistant City Attorney has the right answer, which is that it's not before you. It's not part of the applicant's application. Is it possible to grant a variance? Yeah, a variance would have to come before the Planning Commission for approval. So, but it's possible for you to grant one.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would be reluctant to reduce parking only because we're sort of at the lower threshold already. Ideally, you want to have about 0.75 to 1.25 parking stalls per 1,000 square feet on an industrial building, and we're at 0.85, so we're already at the lower threshold. And then it starts to call into question the marketability of the building. If you get too far down there, then tenants don't want to use your building, and kind of what's the point? But I do think, I don't see anything other than the fire department may have an issue with flipping the configuration of the drive aisle. And if we did flip it, we would keep the same amount of planters, same amount of trees, and they would just, the whole configuration would flip. I think we could do that at the fire. I don't see any reason why we couldn't do it if the fire department doesn't have an objection. And I don't think there's any consequence to it.
Would it be an advantage because that's where you're doing the rainwater anyway, the runoff? Because then they would, I mean, I don't know. I'm speculating here. I'm not a master gardener.
No, this is fine. One of the advantages of having the parking up against the building is that the circulation space is up against the building, so there's less conflict of pedestrians crossing the drive aisle. So for me, as an architect, that's preferable. But I think that we have the flexibility, provided the fire department is okay with it. I think we could flip it. I don't think visually it's going to really have an impact that would be discernible. But that may not be the only consideration, or it may not be a reason to overrule that sort of a request. We don't have any of the accessible parking along that side for a reason. We try to put it as close to the entrances as possible. So that's not an issue. I'm just searching my brain to see if there's a good reason why we can't. And other than the fire department requirement to have the drive aisle a certain distance from the building in their sweet spot for the ladder trucks, I think we can look at it. And it sounds like that would be your preference.
Well, I sympathize, to be honest. I was thinking about this for the month, and I sympathize with yourself, and I sympathize with my colleague. So I was trying to think of a solution. I defer to you.
For point of reference, when the Shoe Palace warehouse went up in Morgan Hill, which is about the same distance from the 101 as this is from Monterey, it was problematic with the residents. Many that I know there and others had a problem with that. So trying to get even, I mean, you could do the math on it, a few more feet of coverage sooner because of the growth on the trees may seem minor, but it definitely, I would definitely make a motion to accept it if this was part of the conditioning.
It's not minor to me. We considered the Shoe Palace building this morning. We had heard that it was something that was grinding the gears of people in the community. We looked at it in Google Earth. That building has roughly 1,500 linear feet of frontage on 101, which is a lot, and the docks face 101, at least a portion of the frontage on 101, it's docks facing 101. We, by comparison, are less than a quarter of the frontage on Monterey, so it's considerably less in terms of total linear footage. And maybe I'm just preferential because I designed this building. I think it looks better and has less impact. And with the amount of trees and the spacing we put them on, I mean, roughly every fifth stall or fourth stall you have a tree. They're big shade trees. It won't be large immediately, but within about 10 years, I'd be surprised if you ever notice the building.
Just one observation. I think we should pick a priority here, because if we put the parking lot on the other side, that can cause more accident with pedestrians, because we have a warehouse and the parking lot is just across, but since we work there, we know we have to go at 5 miles per hour or less, but since a warehouse is going to have different people come in because they're going to have their things stored there, we have to consider that they are not where pedestrians are coming from. So we have to look into that too, because maybe we have a better vision. Like the curb appeal looks better the other way, but there is also like a fallback regarding the pedestrians.
Well, it might not even be possible because of the fire department.
I think it's, to your point, a safer condition for pedestrians that the parking is up against the building because they don't have to cross a drive aisle to approach the entries of the building. I'm not sure it's enough of a concern to override over other concerns, but in a perfect world, you would have the parking up against the building so you minimize the extent to which pedestrians cross driveways.
With that said, if the move was made to the west side, you'd have to move some of the I want to say it's the grass on the corners. See on the top corner and then on the bottom?
Yeah, I think that it would be, from a landscaping standpoint, it would be a net zero change. We would not lose any landscaping. We wouldn't gain any either. Wouldn't lose any trees. Wouldn't gain any either. The trees would be slightly closer to Monterey. I'm not convinced that it creates a better or worse screening scenario of the building. I think it's roughly equivalent. But I'm sensitive to what you guys want. So we're here to listen.
Commissioners, any more questions? All right. Well, thank you for your time.
Thank you very much.
Ty, are there any more?
I received no speaker cards.
Great. Well, I'm going to go ahead and close public hearing. Commissioners, disclosure of any ex parte communications. I see that there are none. And the floor is open for discussion or a motion.
As I said before, I would be in favor of moving to accept this with that condition of the moving of the parking, as Commissioner Ellie had mentioned.
Can we put it as an amendment, of course, with the approval of the fire department?
Yeah, may I make a suggestion?
Yes,
and that would be,
Please.
if you want to add that to the motion, I think you could accept the A&S and add a condition authorizing the community development director to investigate whether this is possible. You can define as best you can what you want done. In other words, moving the parking, moving the trees to the west side. But authorize the community development director to make an administrative change to the plan if that is feasible after consultation with other departments in the city, including the fire department. I think that would be the way to do it if that's what you want to do.
That sounds good to me. Now, for the tree changes, do we need to include that in the amendment as well?
Well, I think it should be, yes, if you want to change something that's shown on the plan, like
Okay.
from the female trees to male trees, that should be added as part of the motion as well, yes.
So if we were to do two amendments to this motion, how would we vote, as per Robert's Rules of Order, would we vote on those amendments and then roll it all, whatever passes all up into the one final amendment?
No, because there is no motion yet. One of you would simply make a motion, move to accept the A&S, whatever, based on the independent analysis and so on, with the following changes from what has been submitted.
Okay, because when I was
So
reading
whatever
about...
your changes are, that's what they would be.
Okay, but when I was reading about how amendments are done, like, I don't want it to be a race condition. Whoever comes first with a motion, that's what we vote on, because that's not proper.
Well, normally that's the way things are done. Someone makes a motion, the motion can suggest changing the plan slightly in the ways we've decided, and you vote on it or you don't, or someone can propose to amend that motion once it's on the floor. But right now, there's no motion on the floor for discussion.
Okay, that's what I'm thinking,
So-
amending the motion that's on the floor.
But
That's
there-
what I'm thinking.
Right, but there is no motion yet.
Okay,
Yes.
and
Just
just,
talking about amendments to the motion, not amendments to the project.
I think that's correct. Let's
Yeah,
listen.
and
So we just
Okay.
going to make a motion following amendments to the project, and that can be seconded and approved.
Right.
And just a question, do you guys want to follow the list by the Valley Water, or because sometimes even change the agenda of the tree, it can affect the roots. Sometimes they can, the roots are very aggressive and they can impact the structure. So should we follow some guide, some list? Or?
Some of the trees on the list that we have they're very messy trees. The roots are very invasive. I mean, I had no problem with any of the trees on here except for the Chinese pistache being male. so it doesn't have sticky berries and it doesn't become invasive. And then I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, the grevillea is very toxic. So, I mean, my mom's a master gardener. I am not. I'm an engineer. So I kind of defer to, I don't really mind what they select, but I don't want a messy
If those are the
tree.
only specific comments, I would advise just going with that rather than changing a whole list of acceptable plants, which may raise other issues.
I have a clarifying question. So if we make a motion with the change of the parking stalls and the trees closer to the railroad, with the caveat of the community service person checking in to make sure that works with the fire department, if for some reason the fire department says, no, it cannot be done, then it just continues to move. It does not have to come back to us. Is that correct?
That would be my recommendation.
Okay. Just want to make sure we're not stalling it for that. It's either, if it can go that way, great. If not, it still goes forward to city.
Yes, I think if you approve the A&S, but add that condition that the community development director will determine whether what you want done is feasible with the other city departments, and if so, will administratively be able to modify the plan. That's the quickest way to do it.
Perfect.
Without coming back to you. And if she determines it's not possible, then you have the approved plan.
Perfect.
So feasibility for fire or just feasible for whomever?
My suggestion had been feasible in consultation with all relevant city or any other departments that might be involved, which she may have a longer list than just fire. But you should specify as closely as you can exactly what moving the trees and parking, what you mean by it. So,
Since this was Commissioner Ellie's idea to move the parking, if she so wants to make the motion, I'll.
Guide me through this motion, everybody. So I'd like to make a motion to accept
well, let me suggest it would be to cover item A on the recommended actions, which are based on your independent analysis, determine the project is exempt from further environmental review under CEQA.
And then we vote on that one.
Right. Well, that can be done in addition at the same time as a resolution.
Okay.
So, and in addition to finding it exempt from further review under CEQA for the reasons stated in the addendum, in the agenda and the staff report, you adopt the resolution approving the proposed architect and site review permit application AS 22-16 with the following additional conditions.
So here's my question.
And then you add the ones that you want to add.
So what if somebody didn't want all those conditions? So then that's the question I have.
And the way that to treat that is you make the motion, assuming someone seconds it, the motion is on the floor for discussion. And at that point, if somebody wants to do something differently, they can either seek to amend the motion,
Okay.
or they can vote no, and you
Got
can
it.
have another motion.
Okay, thank you. So I'd like to make a motion for public hearing 6-1 for the proposed architectural and site review for EMP Properties, new warehouse building at 201 and 221 Yamin Drive, application number AS 22-16. A, based on its independent analysis, determine this project is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to state CEQA guidelines section 15168, projects within the scope of the program EIR, and 15183, projects consistent with the community planner zoning, and B, adopt the resolution approving proposed architectural and site review permit application AS 22-16 with the following amendments: to amend the Chinese pistache tree to be male trees, and to replace the Greville, Greville, plant to a non-toxic plant. In addition, an additional amendment to move the drive aisle, okay, to move the drive aisle on the west side of the parking close to the building and move the parking spots to the west side of the property. No, the other way around. No, that's right. That's right.
pending
And
review.
if I may add, I'm assuming you would also add that this is subject to the determination by the
Yes.
Community Development Director, which she can make administratively after conferring with other city departments and any other outside departments that may be involved, that the requested change in the configuration is feasible. And she can do that administratively without bringing it back to the Planning Commission.
Yes, thank you.
Also add that to the tree selection as well, just in case there's something about the male passive pistache.
Yes.
Okay, the suggestion from the architect was that also the same feasibility determination be made with respect to the pistache trees in the event that male trees are unavailable for some reason.
To select a different tree.
Similar
That's
growth
acceptable
type.
to the
and
maker of the
habit.
motion? Is there a second?
A second.
So the motion is now on the floor for discussion
Any
or
discussions?
vote.
I personally am not convinced that moving the aisle over and the trees over will have any significant impact on the shading of it. That's my personal view.
It does take out about 25% of the distance from the trees to the sight line, though. So you will get a sooner covering of the sight line of the building with, well, it's probably more than, it's about 30, 35 feet, something like that. Yeah, I meant moving it over, the trees will be. But, no, I get it.
Any other questions, comments? All right.
This should be a roll call vote.
Correct.
Because you're adopting a resolution.
Ty, roll call vote, please.
Commissioner Ellie?
Yes.
Commissioner Fugazi?
Yes.
Commissioner Leongard?
Yes.
Commissioner Lewis is absent. Commissioner Ramirez?
Yes.
Vice Chair Kushner?
Yes.
And Chair Bandel?
Yes. And that passes 6-0. Thank you. Congratulations. All right, moving on to 6.2, proposed ARC and site review for Endeavor Storage, new warehouse and light industrial building located at 210 Las Animas Avenue, application AS 21-23. Melissa.
Okay, give me just one moment. Okay. William Shelton is here before you this evening requesting architectural site approval of an 18,825 square foot warehouse and light industrial building. This is on Los Animas Avenue. It's a 4.2 acre site and it's zoned M1 and it's also in the Los Animas Murray Overlay zoning district. So to the north, this is the site, and then to the north of the site is undeveloped industrial land. South is Yagas Creek and industrial development. East is undeveloped industrial land and developed industrial land. And then to the west are some single-family homes and undeveloped industrial sites. Endeavor Storage is a company that rents portable storage containers for residential and commercial applications. They would occupy about 5,100 square feet of the site, so this northern end of the site would be theirs, and that would be divided into about 1,760 square feet of office uses and about 3,300 square feet of warehouse uses. They also will occupy the rear of the site, and this is where they will store their containers. The containers will be stored on site without any goods or materials stored in them, so they're empty containers that that are used to rent to people who will store stuff off-site. The remaining 13,700 square feet of the building would be occupied with light industrial uses. Because this is in the Murray Las Animas Overlay District, there are some different architectural applications that the applicant was required to apply to this project, and that is that they've added some architectural enhancements and some landscaping to soften the impacts of the building because it is adjacent to an existing residential home. And the applicant, I'll go over those in just a minute, but the applicant has applied all of the Murray Las Animas requirements to the site. The site improvements will include 2 driveways from Las Animas Avenue. They'll also have perimeter fencing. They are using a tubular steel fencing, which is more decorative, right at the front of the property, so that's what would be visible from the property. There will be landscaping along the front of the property as well as the front of the building and along the entire perimeter of the site. The applicant's proposing to provide 52 passenger vehicle parking stalls and 3 short-term and 3 long-term bicycle parking stalls. With regard to the architectural design, the enhancements the applicant is proposing include insulated metal panels with parapets. They will be painted in gray tones with dark gray and white trim. There will be 2 storefront features on the site, so one at each end of the building. And the storefront features will also have a enhanced facade entry feature that will further improve the appearance of the building. And this section of the building is actually popped out 3 feet, which is going to improve building articulation and reduce the massing. And again, along this frontage, there will be landscaping. So you'll have a landscaping buffer along here that is going to further screen the building and also provide shade for the cars that are parked in front of the building. This project is exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act under Section 15332, which is Class 32. It's exempt because the project is consistent with the applicable general plan designation and all applicable general plan policies, as well as with the applicable zoning designation and regulations. The proposed development occurs within city limits on a project site of no more than 5 acres, substantially surrounded by urban uses. The project site has no habitat for endangered, rare, or threatened species. Approval of the project would not result in any significant effects related to traffic, noise, air quality, or water quality, and the site can be adequately served by all required utilities and public services. We did receive 1 comment letter on this project, which was actually emailed to you directly, and that relates to providing multimodal transportation for this project. At this time, we are recommending that the Planning Commission, based on its independent analysis, determine this project is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to State CEQA Guidelines Section 15332, Class 32, and adopt a resolution approving proposed architectural and site review permit application AS 21-23. I can answer any questions, but the applicant is also here and can answer questions.
Thank you, Melissa. Commissioners, any questions for Melissa?
It's hard to visualize how it's gonna look like, because when you say landscaping, that can mean anything. Even weeds is landscaping. Like, so we don't know how it's gonna look like. It's up to the developer to put whatever they want. If there is nothing that talks about that over here, as far as I could see.
There are landscaping plans in the plans that were submitted to you for the project, and those plans do specify the trees, shrubs, and ground cover that would be part of this plan. And one thing just to note is that the applicant is required to maintain the landscaping in good health and ensure that it is relatively weed-free. It's actually a requirement in our zoning ordinance. So if you're finding that there are sites where there is a lot of weed growth, that is something that our department can address, the community development department can address.
For commercial?
For commercial, industrial, even to some degree residential.
And for reference, it's page 12 of the project plans, if you want to read it.
So I had a question about, and I thought of it now, what's the width of the sidewalk there?
I believe it's 5 feet, but maybe.
And I noticed there's a construction to the east of it on Las Animas that has the same sort of, it's consistent.
This area here?
Yeah, it's all consistent, so, it'll all look nice. The concern I have is that that area between Murphy and Las Animas, I think between Murphy and Monterey, is considered a pedestrian walkway, but it also it's also a truck route. And I don't know, can we do anything to make that a little bit wider, because the sidewalk is butted right up against that road?
The applicant did clarify that it's a 6-foot wide sidewalk. That is consistent with city standard. I can't. That's something that's under the purview of the Public Works Department.
Okay.
I can't really speak to whether it would be appropriate to increase it. There are probably other implications to that I'm not aware of, but that is the city standard.
Okay. Also, too, the applicant's not going to be surprised that I'm coming forth with some concerns about, again, especially since this is identified as a pedestrian, and I couldn't remember how wide it was. I remember it was relatively narrow. So 6 feet is not narrow, but there are a lot of poisonous and toxic plants for that area. White oleander, that's completely, every part of that plant's no good. The Chinese pistache, same problem. The wilga, the yew, the toyin, that's toxic just until it's ripe. You know, there's a lot of plants like that. I don't have that much of a concern about it, but I would like those plants to be reconsidered, especially the white oleander and that Chinese pistache.
Okay.
Some of those plants drought tolerant. Is that what they're? I know oleander is drought tolerant.
I believe oleander is drought tolerant. I don't know why the landscape architect picked the particular plants, except that they're probably hardy and they probably have a nice appearance to them.
They do. They are.
But I mean, I don't think there's anything that would necessarily tie the applicant specifically to a certain species. So I'll have the applicant come up and speak to that issue. But I think it's probably something that could be reconsidered, especially if you have specific species that you're concerned about. And you said the oleander and the you want the male Chinese pistache.
Yeah, the Chinese pistache, the wilga, the yew, Y-E-W, the toyon, T-O-Y-O-N, that one I'm not too chuffed about, and the white oleander.
I have a question. Is your concern that kids walking by would be touching it and eating it, or
just because that area is specifically considered a pedestrian walkway on our city plan, our 2040 plan. So, yeah, I mean, kids, pets.
No, I know it in residential uses. Certainly, it's recommended not to put oleander in the backyard if you have dogs, but on a commercial installation like that, I guess I'm trying to figure out what the concern is. I mean,
because it's considered a pedestrian walkway. That's why we've identified that area as one of the places for people to walk. It comes back around.
Is that our concern that they're going to be touching, all of the plants that are along the walkway and then sticking their hands in their mouth? It seems like outside of our purview to be worrying about what little kids put in their mouths on especially that kind of a roadway. I guess it's not like there's a school right next to it where there's going to be a lot of kids traffic, but let's just.
Well, I think it's in our purview to be thoughtful about, like the Chinese pistache, the female plant is considered invasive in the state of California. That's not great. I mean, we've talked about other projects that have those seed balls that come down. Those could be quite dangerous. So, yeah, I think it's. I was very concerned that at the last session, it seemed pretty clear to me that staff doesn't feel empowered to ask for things. So, as a check and balance, I'm asking.
Okay.
See, there are no more questions for Melissa.
One final, sorry. When is this project expected to start, do you think?
I'm going to defer to the applicant.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure.
All right, I'm going to open it to public hearing.
I've received no speaker cards at this time.
Great. And if the applicant would like to come up.
Morning, Lon Davis. I'm with Daveco Associates. We're the architect on the project. We are not the landscape architect, so I can't tell you much about trees. I'm not any expert on that. I don't think there's an issue if we have to modify that or make a different plan. I don't think that's going to make a big deal as far as the project is concerned. As far as starting time, I really don't know. And the way things are today, we've got to get the construction drawings done. We've got to get it out to bidders. Contractors are busy right now. I really couldn't say. I mean, we're going to start it as soon as we can get it put together and done. It's not going to sit around, but I couldn't really give you a timeline as far as when it's going to start at this point in time anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. I noticed that there's a lot that needs to be done, all the clearing out that is on the material that was provided to us.
Yeah.
Nice. And thank you for your consideration about the plants.
Yeah, I don't think that's a big issue. We'll just talk to the landscape architect, and whatever one she wrote down that you're concerned about, I'm sure she can come up with a different one.
Any other questions for
Anything
the
else?
applicant? No? Thank you very much.
Sure.
Anybody else, Ty? That's it? All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the public hearing. Commissioners, please disclose if you have any ex parte communications. I see that there are none. All right. The floor is open for discussion or a motion.
All right. I'd like to make a motion, if there's no discussion, for item 6.2 of the proposed architectural and site review for Endeavor Storage, new warehouse and light industrial building located at 210 Los Alamos Avenue, application number AS 21-23. Council, do I do both together, A and B?
Yes, I would suggest,
Okay.
or C and D in this case, it looks like.
Oh,
Yes.
sorry, C and D.
Yes,
Thank you.
Read C and then D also, and then
The
with
amendment.
whatever amendment you wish to make to it.
Okay, thank you. So item 5C, based on the independent analysis, determine this project is exempt from further environmental review pursuant to state CEQA guidelines, section 15332, class 32. And item 5D, adopt a resolution approving proposed architectural and site review permit, application AS 21-23, with the amendment to remove the identified poisonous or toxic plants listed as wilga, yew, tyon, and white oleander, but not limited to those plants, and then with the Chinese pistache to identify male plants only, and if that's not possible, to select another tree.
I will second. Motion is second. Roll call vote.
Commissioner Ellie?
Yes.
Commissioner Fugazzi?
Yes.
Commissioner Leongart?
Yes.
Commissioner Lewis is absent. Commissioner Ramirez?
Yes.
Vice Chair Kushner?
Yes.
And Chair Bendel?
Yes. And that passes 6-0. Thank you very much. And before we move on with 7 new business, we're going to take a 10-minute break and come back for training. 7:05, please. Be back.
What is this next? Where are these next?
Well, I'm going to start here.
Where are these next? What do you mean, what's the training?
Well, the PowerPoints are on the computer here, so it has to be the person standing here, I think. So I'll start standing here, and then you'll go up.
The clicker's here.
What? Okay, we got to. Did you?
Yep.
Oops.
I can close these two. Which one is yours? Not the council.
Well, I don't know. Probably not the council training. No?
No. Is that it?
We have one called We have one called Housing Training for PC. I believe is the title of it.
Where did PC training?
No, that's not it. Yeah, Sharon has it.
Yeah.
I have it on a stick too.
Yeah.
Oh, well, wait. Let me see if it's
Sharon
still-
said she was going to load it on here.
Is
Maybe
that,
that's
that's
it.
probably it.
That looks like it. Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, okay. All right. Yeah, good. Like my usual, right? Okay. Good.
Yeah, but that's why I keep saying sometimes, even though there is like
You're going to just use it.
6 people voting.
I just want to make
no,
sure
but
I
one,
have voted on mine.
yes,
too,
and
so
one
it
voted
should
no.
be-
At least it ends up
Okay.
going to that.
Yep. Okay.
Even though it
Nope.
doesn't matter in one way, but we should raise the bar. Talk about it. I feel like ask a question, and even if we deny,
I'm turning this. 3, 4. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4. No, I turned this off. I turned this one off. Yeah. Yeah. Then when we switch, Jolie.
but that we saw that happen too with like the curb appeal, because it had a warehouse that came here before.
So you wanted to lie that the trees moving actually makes it. Nobody has to going to be improved. So we can it's only 35 feet.
No, I understood that part.
But it's even more than just the diagonal. It's also as you're going down the road, the trees are here.
Yeah.
They actually come together.
Yeah, but my concern was, I understood that part, but my concern is that even that would be possible because that's a railroad. So you know how they have to have a clearance?
Sure. But they
With
already
the,
have a bunch of big trees all the way. So there's already like a tree map, already like 25 feet of clearance. Because when they're going to put it anyway, right? They're going to put the fingers over there, right? And then they're going to put it here, right? The railroad's over here, right? And then there's a detention pond river that's here, right? And so this actually gives you 25 feet already what you have down the way. Those other trees that are planted there already in front of the other buildings that are already growing further out into the
but then comes the other thing, how about the pedestrians? No, if there is a parking.
See, that's where it doesn't make any difference on this particular plan either, because there's 26 people in the entire building. It's a warehouse.
No, but different people are coming in because they're gonna store. They say they expect like 50 visitors per day or something like that. So,
You're talking about the second one now?
no, the first one.
No, the first one is the situation they're not going to have more than 52 people working in the entire building. And even with the traffic we're talking about, are coming in the morning, okay, that are parked the trucks.
How about the people who goes there to check?
It's not a
No, I mean because they're gonna remember it's a storage place.
retail business.
I know, but you know sometimes even so when you have a warehouse and you put your stuff in storage, sometimes you go there because you need to get something.
Never fill that one.
Oh yeah, for sure not. Yeah.
As far as parking spaces, down there. It's a forward thinking that I would like to see in the city. It's like, okay, if you go look at these buildings that are here. So that's the first one, okay? Those two are new right there. Those aren't going to change, right?
Yeah.
Okay, these are probably going to change as they get out here. You can see the other trees there. So there's plenty of buffer there. This is going to get all the way outside. And this is not now, but it will because it's too expensive property. Right? So that will change eventually. This will get all of these will. And so if you start your standard,
Yeah.
if you start the rate standard
Yeah.
down here,
Yeah.
that means now people will start to do the same thing as they move down. And what you'll end up having is you'll have an industrial park that nobody will see, which is great. Especially because there is going to be apartments on the other side of the street, too. This will all be apartments eventually, all of this.
Eventually, in 20 years.
Oh, yeah. There'll be enough money in it. And
Yeah.
the city is being encouraged to convert the zoning on those properties over so that they can be, and it was in the housing element to do so.
Yeah.
So,
Which in that area is okay because.
oh, it's absolutely okay. It's exactly where they already have
Yeah.
apartments here. And no, this is ideal.
Just making sure.
It is.
It
It
shouldn't be
is.
6-story high apartment buildings, okay? That's not.
Yeah.
That's not cool. The typical 2-3-story high apartment buildings are the city just fine. This whole place here is going to get completely done. You're going to see another Alexander
That's in
Station.
50 years.
Well, that's probably because there's so much money in it right now. Because Sacramento's pushing it so hard, and that property is.
They should
really
put it everything. But see, that is the thing. That is public transportation. They should focus on that area. And instead of
There's nobody to focus on. It's the investor has to focus on. It's a private thing. So
But you know, when we propose that, when we propose the plan, the housing element, they want to know, okay, it's close by but you know, so they don't have to give them some land that's no idea, but just because it's closer to the public transportation. So what I'm saying is like it should be more like public transportation, more development, so we can bring all of those in that area and kind of like refresh and put it all there, you know? Because for example, where I live by Laurel, so they are going. There is like a little part of where the Uvas Park, yeah, in Laurel Street. Laurel. Yeah. Yeah. No. Laurel.
Laurel.
Yeah.
Sorry, I
Because that's actually
So you'll be happy to know right
this tree is not even American. It's not even American. That's the name of the tree is Laurel actually.
now. You want side on this? I've been actively policing this entire area lately. Stuff in the city on all of the homeless encampments.
Oh yeah. And I cleaned that. I have done it.
I'm giving it over to city fire police.
Yeah.
I can show you hundreds of photos. I walk there 3 times a week, but I walk through it.
Yeah.
Like solar panels, like
yeah.
fires underneath the bridge.
Oh yeah. No,
I
that
walk under that bridge 3 times a week.
ahead of time when we call my neighbors, we call the fire department
So
like
one of your neighbors,
2-3 times per week.
this neighbor facilitates them.
Which one?
This is where the camp is. Okay?
Which one?
So this neighbor right here allows the homeless people from here to go through their yard and to get into the city. They actually put cardboard, that's what you see right there.
Oh, I saw that.
That's the cardboard, there's a gate right here.
Yeah, I thought it was for their use.
Why would they go take a bunch of cardboard and lay it down themselves? I don't think so. The other side right here is the entrance to the gate.
Yeah.
So right here,
Yeah.
this is the camp. This is from here to here is all one big camp. Okay? And the entrance to this camp is directly across from where that path is. So maybe I'm wrong.
I thought that was for the because you know what? Let me show this.
Why would it be cardboard? Yeah, he's got.
He does like yeah. So they use that. The other one here, one of the not this house, but the other house. He actually used that for like his truck. He cleans because he collects garbage. So he put it on his truck and then to clean the levee.
That's great.
So see, that's why I thought that this other neighbor with the
I don't think so, but I could be wrong.
No, you could be up to something because I thought, oh, maybe they want to access, the neighbor wants to access.
No, but
Because a lot of neighbors, they go there to clean the levee.
yeah, but this right here is a camp.
So then tell me this. Every there's like 2 cars, 1 or 2 cars over here.
Those are people walking. I park over here.
No. I mean during the night.
Oh, during the night?
They sleep there.
Yeah, there are people that do that. And there's another person who has a motorhome for 3 years that was over there. It's a junk.
He goes there for he goes there for 2 years now. But the problem is, he stopped there for 2 or 3 days. Recently.
You talking about the car or you talking about the motorhome?
No, the motorhome.
Yeah, well, the motorhome.
But he goes there and spends like a few hours there, almost every day. But then recently, I would say 2 weeks ago, he went there and stayed like for 2 or 3 days there.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know.
With the air conditioner sticking
Yeah,
up the side.
yeah.
Not even registered. Registered in 2020. Has the driver's seat is all, there's no cushion on it at all. It's just
Do
a
you know
metal
how many
frame.
how many fires we caught, and then we called the fire department, we called the police. Do you know
Under here, there's 3 fires. As many, there's always one. As many as 3 fires smoldering under there every time I walk in. Because we just started cleaning it out again, by the way, so that because of what I'm doing, so the smoke started coming in, clearing out all the stuff. But there's one more section.
So has a guy, which is he works for the city. He's the oh my god, I forgot his
Part-time trash guys.
No, he's not a trash guy. He's actually the guy who today I'm just exhausted. He's the he checked the city. He's the one who checked backyard if you complain about something. The code enforcement. Dennis Castro. He used to go there, get all those guys out. Then the city told him, "You can't."
No. And that's why there's a new project. Because you know the new ordinance that got passed, right?
Yeah.
So that's part of the thing that Danny was talking about earlier, too. That new ordinance has been passed.
They're not supposed to be there.
We have to go through steps as a city
Yeah.
to offer them this, to offer them that. And then, so this right now is where you live.
Mine shows the end of last year still.
This is the ability for fire. This is all.
No shit. No shit.
And everybody back there has got like full sheds. And
Yeah.
This whole.
That's why there was a development that the apartment would start
You haven't
right
called
here.
us to order yet, buddy.
Call you to order. I'm the attorney. We need a boss here. We got a boss over there.
So he built right here. No.
All right, Commissioners, I think that's a long enough break.
Wait. We have 2 missing. One. Oh yeah, 1 missing. You said 7:10. Yeah. It's been like 2 months already. They have been cleaning out.
Okay, should we start?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much for offering us the opportunity to give you some training. We hope you appreciate it and will understand it and enjoy it. But as we go along, if you have some questions, I think it's, as far as I'm concerned, please ask them. If the questions get too bogged down, or if we get too bogged down, we'll move forward. But we would appreciate the opportunity to answer questions, because a lot of what we're talking about is quite technical and kind of abstruse, frankly. So we don't want to go into a technical thing and then somehow people aren't following. So, okay, Jolie and I are going to tag team here. I'm Andy Faber, City Attorney. Jolie is the Assistant City Attorney. We have a PowerPoint with 20-some slides, and some of them are mine, some are hers. So I'm going to start out. Today's training, we're going to talk about a variety of state laws that deal with housing. To some degree, it's historical, starting with the first of them, which is really the housing element law itself, which goes back to the 1960s. And then we're going to talk about various laws that affect housing approvals, some of which will come in front of you, some of which may not actually come to the Planning Commission, but nonetheless they're good to know about. We're going to talk about the Housing Accountability Act, the Density Bonus Law, the ADU law, and then a couple of the SBs that have come out recently. There are a lot more than this, but SB 330, SB 9, and SB 6 all affect housing potentialities in Gilroy. And then we're going to talk a little bit about conflicts of interest that might affect you as commissioners. So I'm going to start out. The general trend, as I'm sure you're all aware, of the state's housing laws in the last really 40 years, let's say, but it's been accelerated, I think, in the last 10, it's kind of in the direction that we talk about on this slide. They're to strengthen the housing element and enforcement. And in general, that is pushing cities toward increased density and increased provision for affordable housing, less reliance on city zoning, and less local discretion. Some cities would say that means less home rule, and there are lawsuits pending on some of these laws, as I'm sure you know, relating to the fact that the state has taken away lots of land use discretion, which traditionally has been a local prerogative. In addition, they focus on expedited processing with the idea that housing development should take less time to get through the approval process.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Did you guys print out the copy of those slides?
We didn't bring extra copies, I don't think, unless Sharon has them. We can certainly give them to you, though.
Can you send?
Yeah.
Okay, you're going to send these to us then?
Sharon has actually the PowerPoint.
Yeah,
Send
kind
them
of
to
similar
you.
to last time.
Yes.
After the training,
Perfect.
we'll
Yeah,
send everything.
after the
And
training.
next time it would be very useful to print out so we can make notes while we are going, because after,
Yeah, we actually can go make copies now if you would like.
yeah, that would be awesome. Another break.
Okay. Do you want to take a formal break while that's being done then, or not? Or should we just keep going? Okay, we'll keep going. Right. Okay. So the processing that the state is pushing cities towards involves increased use of checklists, such that an applicant knows in advance these are the exact things I have to give to the city, so that there's, not that this happens in Gilroy, but in other cities there is sometimes staff game playing where it takes forever for an application to become complete because the staff keeps asking for more and more elements to it. Also having fewer meetings, fewer public hearings, and that's done in several ways. One is by making some approvals ministerial, meaning that the staff just does them without any discretion. Also, there is a maximum of hearings on certain kinds of applications, which Jolie will mention. The applicability of CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, has been reduced for affordable projects particularly. So all of these are ways in which the state is trying to speed up the processing for housing, and particularly for affordable housing. In addition, in many projects there's reduced parking now, particularly if the project is near a transit line, and we'll talk about that a little bit later also. Okay, so starting out talking about housing elements first. As you all know, there's a process by which RHNA numbers are developed, RHNA, Regional Housing Needs Allocation. And the way that works is that every 8 years, HCD, which is the State Department of Housing and Community Development, in general has general oversight over all these processes we're talking about, determines what is the need that is for each region of the state. I think there are 8 or 9 regions that the state's divided into for this purpose. And then the local councils of government try to allocate those houses of different price categories or different affordability categories to individual cities and counties. So our regional government is ABAG, Association of Bay Area Governments. Monterey's is AMBAG, Association of Monterey Bay Area Governments. San Diego has SANDAG. So there are a bunch of these different regional governments. They spend a lot of time, and they decide, for example, ABAG decides that of all the cities in the Bay Area, your city has to produce a certain, not produce, but make allowances for a certain amount of housing in moderate level, moderate, low income, very low income, above moderate, and so on. And so each city is assigned a set of RHNA numbers, and they have to incorporate those numbers into their housing element when they update the housing element. There's an elaborate process that this goes through, and there's an appeal process, which I gather, at least in the most recent thing, is virtually impossible to do. For example, Palo Alto appealed its allocations the most recent time. I understand they got nowhere in the appeal, although Palo Alto being Palo Alto, they have a big staff, they had a lot of people to put on it, so they did a very serious appeal and basically got no relief. Gilroy did not appeal its numbers, and as I said, the appeals, the regional governments, I think, have been told to toe the line and give allocations, which may or may not be very sensible. Some of them, when you look at them, are quite difficult. There's some cities that really say, how are we possibly going to meet our allocation? Gilroy doesn't say that. We have tried in good faith to meet it. The county of Santa Clara, for example, allocation went up from a few hundred to 3,000. Well, that doesn't sound like very much for a county of 2 million people. However, as you know, in Santa Clara County, there's a compact between the county and the cities that says development occurs in cities. So the kind of development that HCD wants to see, which is mostly higher density residential housing, or affordable housing, just can't be built in the county. They ended up basically putting all of their allocation onto the Pleasant Hill Golf Course. They said, we've got a golf course. It'll be redeveloped eventually. San Jose is letting us take credit for it, even though it will probably be developed in San Jose. So odd things like that happen, but most cities simply buckle down and say, all right, we've got to produce a housing element that accounts for all of our allocations. So to talk about the housing element itself, as I said, each county and city must include a housing element in its general plan. Generally speaking, they get revised every 8 years. We're now in the 6th cycle of these housing elements, going back quite a ways. As I mentioned, the code sections are 77 pages long. That's in a book like this, which has all of the planning laws in it. So 77 of these pages deal with housing elements, and every year there's more. As an example, I mentioned emergency shelters. This year we had to rezone to make more provisions for emergency shelters before they would even consider our housing element, even though that's really not part of it. Also, a major part of housing elements now are something called AFFH, which is affirmatively further fair housing. It started out as a federal mandate. I have a quote here from ABAG, which says, HCD has emphasized in comments on jurisdictions' draft housing elements that AFFH should be central to the housing element's overarching goals and inform all objectives and policies. And that deals primarily with fairness and discrimination and equity among different racial categories and economic and social classes. It's become, a few cycles ago, this didn't exist. Now it's become a very important feature. And in fact, to go back to the quote for a second, they mentioned HCD has emphasized in comments on drafts. So let me speak a little bit about that process, because there's a requirement in the law, which we'll get to, that HCD has to review a city's housing element. I think you all know that, and basically decide whether they think it's okay or not. This process is agonizing. I mean, the city started working on this a year and a half ago or more. We hired a consultant, Michael Baker, who were very good. They were doing about 20 other housing elements. They really know what they're doing. And submitted a draft housing element to HCD in October of 2022. HCD, by statute, has 90 days to consider it. So I believe it was the 90th day when they got back to us with, of course, a long letter written by somebody with a lot of things that they wanted added to it. We made revisions. We had meetings with HCD staff. Cindy worked particularly hard on that. And then you end up with a different person, by the way, who writes the next letter. Not the same person who wrote the last letter. That person, you get a new person who's been there 4 months and has different views. So it's a frustrating experience. And all in all, I mean, our housing element was at HCD and various reviews for over 5 months, for example. And it's a complex process, and they are, I guess if you wanted to be sympathetic to them, you would say, well, they've been given a lot more power recently. They're enforcing other laws as well. They have a lot of new staff. But from our perspective, it makes it pretty difficult to get your housing element reviewed in a timely manner. Generally speaking, how many of you have actually looked at the housing element? Have you? Oh, wow. Great. I applaud you. It's over 300 pages. It's quite a document, and it's full of it's full of statistics and charts and graphs and numbers, etc. I didn't put this in the PowerPoint. I was talking to Jolie about it. We had a lawsuit in the office in the early 80s involving another city's housing element. It was a page and a half long. Now, I don't think actually it wasn't adequate at a page and a half, so I don't want I don't want to imply that. But in those days, a typical housing element was 9 or 10 pages long. Now ours is 367 pages, and it was very expensive for a lot of work for the consultants, a lot of work presumably even for HCD to read it. And it has very detailed descriptions and statistical data. The heart of the plan, too, is the basic requirement for a land use inventory. In other words, the city has to identify sites, land in the city, where the RENA numbers can be accommodated. The requirement isn't that the city build housing. It isn't that the city even have developers build housing, because it's really not in your control. However, a city must identify in its housing element where its RENA numbers can be accommodated with land that has suitable zoning for multifamily, single family, whatever it is, and is free of other constraints. Now, and in prior housing elements, we've had to rezone land to get enough land. With the previous housing element, we had to do that. The city rezoned a number of commercial sites. This has caused great furors in some other cities. Saratoga, for example, had a hearing that 800 people attended. They're smaller than Gilroy is. Yeah. And, pardon me? Atherton. Well, and Los Gatos has had huge fights about their. And when you when you rezone, you also have to do environmental impact reporting. So it gets very complicated, and it can be very contentious among different parts of the city. But that is the basic requirement, though. And now HCD in recent years has gotten stricter. For example, if a city shows a certain site, HCD wants to know more about that site. For example, let's say it's a commercial site that a city says this is likely to be developed residentially in the next 8 years. They want to know why. Why do you think that? Have you talked to the owner? What does the owner say? What do the neighbors say? Is it realistic? So they are subjecting the city's identification of proper zoning and for sites to much more scrutiny than they used to. All of which, again, makes the process much harder. So HCD, as you see on this slide, reviews housing elements for substantial compliance. We have found that HCD requires a lot more typically than even those 77 pages in the codes require. As an example, this year we had a fire drill at the end where they wanted to know if we'd ever been sued of unfair housing claims in the past 8 years or 10 years, and if so, what had happened. And we didn't think we ever had, but we didn't want to represent to a state agency we've never been sued without actually trying to look at court records and think, God, maybe there's something we missed somewhere along the line. So things like that, which are not required by code, but they wanted them in the housing element. They also want many programs, want the city to adopt lots of programs to further the goals of the housing. Again, some of these programs are somewhat arbitrary and go beyond anything that's required by state law. We have an interesting history with HCD in this regard, in that we've been in litigation twice involving prior housing elements. I think I may have told you this before. I know I told the council. In the 1990s, we had a housing element that HCD refused to certify, and not HCD. HCD didn't sue us, but the Law Foundation, people like that, did sue us. And we actually had a trial on the question of whether our housing element was adequate, even though HCD said it wasn't. And I tried that case for the city. We won. The court actually said, you're right, city, your housing element's okay, even though HCD doesn't like it. The same thing happened the next housing cycle. So in 2000, with the 2002 housing cycle, again, HCD refused to certify Gilroy's housing element, wrongly, we thought. we were sued by public interest law firms, by 5 different firms, with some plaintiffs that they sort of found here and there, claiming that our housing element was inadequate. And again, we actually tried that case, and the court again said, "City, you're right. You have," because we said, "Look, here's the statute. The statute says you have to have this, this, this." You know, it's a long list by now. Even then, it was a long list. And we said, we have all those things. HCD doesn't like it because we don't have a bunch of other things that they think we should put in. So in that case, it's called Fonseca versus City of Gilroy. It's a reported case. It went up to the appellate courts. They wrote an opinion. So it's in the law books. And it's precedent. And it's precedent it stands for the fact that a housing element can be in substantial compliance with state law even if HCD doesn't like it, which is relevant right now. And we'll talk about it a little more in a minute. After winning that case, this is 2 now, I said to staff, I don't want to do this again. I don't think we should be in the business of fighting with HCD if we can possibly avoid it. And one of the reasons is on this next slide, because if HCD does not certify your housing element, then there are certain direct things that follow, and there's certain state grant programs that you're not eligible for. Even if a court were to say your housing element was okay, the way that the law is written, in part, it says certain eligibility for certain state funding and state assistance is dependent on HCD certifying your housing element. And I said, we've won twice. I don't know that we can keep. I don't want to keep litigating this issue. We should do whatever we possibly can to get our housing element into compliance. That has become an important issue right now, as we talk about on this slide, because I'm sure you've all heard of the builder's remedy. And some cities are being subjected to many builder's remedy applications. The builder's remedy is not in the statute. It's a colloquial term. And what it means, it goes back to Section 65589.5D of the Housing Accountability Act. And that says that the Housing Accountability Act, which Jolie will talk about next, generally requires that cities only apply objective standards to housing projects. But it also says, and this is the builder's remedy, that unless your housing element is in substantial compliance, you as a city cannot turn down an affordable housing project, even if it violates your general plan or zoning or both. Okay, which is a very strong hammer. And as I'm sure you've seen in the newspapers, a number of cities have been hit with this. I've been told that Los Gatos has 11 builder's remedy applications, for example, because their housing element is all tied up with environmental impact reporting and various things. With respect to our housing element, the council adopted it May 1st. HCD finally said it was okay a few months later, after we made some minor changes which we regarded as not affecting the suitability, the actual compliance of it. So our legal position, which I believe is correct, is that our housing element was adequate and is adequate as of May 1st. And under the Fonseca case, I think there's good law for that. HCD issued a memo in March of 2023, a public memo. You can find it on their website. And that memo says that as far as they are concerned, housing elements are not in compliance, A, until they say so, and B, on the date they say so. So their public position on this is that a housing element is not in compliance, even if a court were to say it is, until they've actually finished their review and written you a letter saying it's in compliance. They don't cite any law for that, and I don't believe it's inappropriate. I don't believe it's actually an accurate position, but that is what they say. Cities have not litigated that yet. I'm sure it's going to happen because there will be other cities, potentially like Gilroy, where the housing element's adopted, HCD approves it, but in the meantime, there are applications filed. So this
where do they take that power from? I mean, do they just basically claim that they have authorization to proceed in that manner?
They issued an authoritative memo with citing no authority. How can I say it? They're a state agency, and they said that we're going to let you know that this is our position. They did not. I don't believe. If you think, for example, suppose you hypothetically, okay, suppose a city adopts a housing element on this date, and then 3 months later, or whatever, HCD approves it. But let's say there were no changes, whatever. HCD, would it make sense to say the housing element is not in compliance until they say so? If it's exactly the same as it was 3 months earlier? I mean, I don't think so.
Yeah.
And they don't cite any case law, and the Fonseca case. You know, it's interesting, Fonseca, when we won that case, I thought it was a dead letter because the case dealt with a feature of housing element law from 2002 that had been changed. So actually, the legal point at issue in the case was kind of mooted. We won the case because we complied with the laws that existed in 2002, but since then the law was changed. So I thought, well, nobody's going to ever cite Fonseca because it's of no interest because it dealt with the old law. But in fact, it's the leading case dealing with this exact issue of when a housing element is in compliance. So this may well be a subject that gets litigated. I suspect it will.
So
yes.
There have not been any other cases that have used that precedent and
There
succeeded with it?
No, there are. There actually are a couple since 20. But yes, and there's a case that came out in 2019, for example, that relied on Fonseca and agrees with it.
And curiously, were they
But these are not
more in
builders-
compliance than we were, or less in compliance than we were? And how does one determine the substantial compliance?
Well, the court says it's for the court to determine that.
Right.
Yeah, the court, and as I said, the way they do it is to look through and say, here's what we did with Fonseca. Said, here's what the state law requires. And here's where it is, turn to page 23, and here it is in the...
So comparatively, does Gilroy look like it is more compliant than the one that was already adjudicated in 2019?
I think so, but it's hard to say. It's hard to draw that kind of
Just
comparison.
curious.
Yeah, no. The builder's remedy is a strange thing. It's getting a lot of press because we hear about it all the time. And it's really designed for scofflaw cities. It's designed for cities that say, we don't care what you say, state. You're not pushing us around. We're not in that category. We, in good faith, as I said, we submitted a housing element draft to them in October of 2022, which was probably okay. I mean, they wanted more stuff, and we put it in. So we're not in. It's a strange remedy because there are some cities that have to be hit over the head with a 2x4 to get the message, I'm sure. There are some very wealthy cities, for example, that simply don't want affordable or higher density housing. But Gilroy has never been in that category. We don't turn down affordable projects. We don't fight about them. We don't refuse to update our housing element or anything like that. So it's odd that, well, we only have 2 applications, as you probably know. As I mentioned, other cities have many more, and probably some cities really deserve them. But it's a strange kind of thing because even with Los Gatos, where I said they have 11, once they get their housing element certified, or at least adopted, if they adopt a valid one, then that will stop. So it's not an unlimited supply, but meanwhile developers are piling on.
So I have a question on that.
Yes.
What recourse then, I'm assuming there is no recourse if the builder's remedy is perceived to be in effect.
Is perceived to be what? I'm sorry?
In effect, because it hasn't been, the state has not come back and said, yay, everything is capiche or whatever. And then what if a developer starts the process of a project? And the city is saying, wait a minute, we did everything, and the state's saying, yeah, but we haven't had a chance yet to give you your letter. That gray area.
Well, procedurally, probably what would happen is the city wouldn't give grading permits, building permits, whatever. A developer, I don't think a developer can normally, could really start a project. I think what a developer would have to do is, if the city fought it, go to court, seek a writ of mandate, and that's an order from a judge ordering the city to approve the project.
So, for example, up in Los Altos or Los Gatos, where there's all this going on, I mean, do you see that might happen? Where then Los Gatos? I mean, what's the whole purpose then?
Yeah, no,
if the city
absolutely
still has control to stop the process.
It absolutely may happen, and in fact, what we're seeing is when developers file an application, which they call a builder's remedy application, they accompany it with a letter from an attorney saying, city, we got you. You've got to approve this project. And so I think to the extent a city fights that, and there are other requirements. I've oversimplified it. There are some other requirements for the land, and CEQA still applies, for example, and there are other things I don't want to go into detail here. But at some point, a city could say, we disagree. We don't think we have to approve this. It violates our general plan or zoning. And the remedy would be for a developer to go to court to sue to force the city to approve the project.
So more than likely, it would be then beholden to the developer then to pursue legal in order to push that project through.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
Right.
Thank
I
you.
believe so. Okay, I'm going to switch over now with Jolie. She's
I
going
have
to
a
use
quick
this one.
question, though.
Sorry,
Based
go
on
ahead.
the application, logistically, this is fascinating because based on when the application is due, is there like a time that applications are not accepted before this date? And then is there a gray area built into the application process? Does that make sense?
To some degree there is, and in part that gray area traditionally has related to applications being complete or not. Jolie's going to talk more about that issue because it used to be, and there were cities that were famous, again, not Gilroy, but there were cities that would play a game where if they didn't like a project, instead of just saying, okay, your application's complete, but we don't like your project, staff would say, well, it's incomplete because you didn't give us this, and then you give that, and then the county of Santa Clara actually to some degree does this. Then they say, well, now you have a new application, we've got to look at it again, now you didn't give us this, so give us something else. So the completeness of applications was the trigger for when someone gets a right to say, all right, now you've got a process, it's complete. The state laws that we're talking about here have tried to shortcut that process and limited the ability of cities to play games like that with the checklist. And as I said, Jolie's going to talk a little more about that. So let me turn it over, Jolie. Here, I'll turn on your mic here. Okay?
All right, so I'm going to be talking about the Housing Accountability Act, and we put the dates in here so people could see that these statutes have been around for a long time, and but they've been recently, what I like to say, they've been recently amended to add some more teeth, and so more remedies, and then HCD has an enforcement team, so it's definitely a different playing field. So the Housing Accountability Act seeks to limit the city's authority to restrict new housing, and because the whole Housing Crisis Act, which we'll talk about later, is to provide for more housing. There's been a statewide concern about housing that's available to all income levels, all people, and we just don't have enough housing. So anyway, the Housing Accountability Act is making it very difficult or almost impossible to disapprove or reduce the density of a housing project. And housing project is defined in the Housing Accountability Act. So if your project providing housing complies with the zoning code, the general plan, and other objective standards, you cannot reduce it. You cannot disprove it unless you make findings. And you also can't reduce the density. So when you don't like the height of a housing project and you say, I want you to reduce the height, you're going to get in trouble with the Housing Accountability Act if it meets the zoning and the general plan's height, because that's reducing density. So,
quick question for you. So, since it says this has been in place since 1982, why is it that over all those years that there hasn't been a lot more housing been built?
It's a good question. Housing people have tried using these laws, but it wasn't really enforced. I know there hasn't. When you look at the case law for the Housing Accountability Act, there was just a few cases. I mean, Andy, you can agree. The Honcharoo cases. There's been 1, 2, or 3 Honcharoo cases, and a lot of times people thought it only applied to affordable housing, but case law said no, it applies to a housing development project. So, and so I can say that if you look at what the Housing Accountability Act is now, it's become more stricter with its application. And so if you're looking if the project complies with the zoning, general plan, or other objective standards, you look at it from a reasonable person standard, not the city's determination, but if a reasonable person could review that objective standard and say, yes, it applies, then the city has to agree with that. There are exceptions. The city can disapprove a project with findings, but a preponderance of evidence, but the project you'll have to show that it will cause an adverse health and safety impact. We refer to those as super findings. They're very difficult to make. And so it's just very, very difficult. And they have to be health and safety impacts based on preponderance of evidence and with the current zoning general plan and those other objective standards that are in place at the time of the application. You can't go off and do a study to use against a project to say, oh, you're not, and now you don't meet it. Years before, you could do that. You could come up with some other study and say, oh, this project doesn't meet this study.
Can I answer
Yeah.
Commissioner Kushner's question also, just to respond? I think, going back to, there was a crash in 2008, as we know. We had the huge, nobody was building housing for 4 or 5 years. Lawsuits under the Housing Accountability Act really took off around 2015. And once there were some that were very notable, including one in Los Gatos, then the state started looking at it also and saying, hey, we've got this law, let's strengthen it. Let's make it tougher. For example, this reasonable person standard that Jolie mentioned.
That was added, yeah.
That's added. And that's, normally city actions are upheld if there's substantial evidence that's reasonable on the city side. The reasonable person standard says it'll be that the developer's project should be deemed to be in compliance if a reasonable person might think it is. It doesn't matter what the city thinks.
Yeah.
So you can go into court and say, hey, I'm reasonable.
Yeah,
I'm an attorney,
exactly.
I'm reasonable.
So it says 1982, but essentially it has been amended.
It's been amended greatly in the last few years to make it strong. It's one of these, that's why we're talking about it today. It's one of these laws that keeps getting made stronger and stronger.
And did that then birth the Housing Accountability Act is what brought HCD into existence?
I don't think so. I think it was in existence before that. That's an interesting question we should look at.
Then there's another point about Housing Accountability Act. There was a question years ago about does it apply to subdivisions, and yes, it does apply to subdivisions. They amended it to add subdivisions. As Andy says, there's more case law. I've litigated a Housing Accountability Act. In the HCD bulletins, there's all the Housing Accountability Act cases where the city's losing them. And I always want to say, how come they don't put the city that I won a Housing Accountability Act case? I'm one of few and far between. But
I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding the great findings. Can you give some specific example? Because there are projects that came to us, and I was like, this is like, how's this safe? Because, for example, we had like housing that was by the levee, but because it was it was so close to the wall, for me that was a fire hazard. So, can you?
Yeah, it would have to be.
Line?
Yeah, well, no, it would have to be preponderance evidence that that project was going to cause a health and safety impact based on some sort of objective standard that was in place at the time. And I recall that project, and that project was not in a high fire zone, and so trying to apply high fire zone conditions or denying it because of that, we would be in trouble because we would be going against the objective standards. And you have to make the findings that it is an adverse health and safety impact. And it has to be based by, evidence in the record. And so what the Housing Accountability Act is trying to get away from with Planning Commission and councils, well, we can talk more about later on, but the discretion of the city to be able to say, this building's too big, too tall, I don't like it, I think it's a fire hazard, I think it could be a traffic hazard. You can't do that unless that there are some sort of objective standards or policies that are in place at the time the application was submitted.
Talking about traffic, like, there was just one, like, street. So in case of a fire, in that specific case that I mentioned before, so in case of a fire, it just has one route. Like, is that, so the line there, that's why it's hard to figure out what's like a,
Well, when
could
you
be a great
yeah.
finding?
But if you have a project that's been reviewed by the Public Works and the Fire Department and traffic engineer, and they don't find anything that that project doesn't comply with, or it's a problem, coming up and saying that you believe that this is a safety issue, that's not going to be upheld. That's too discretionary, and you'll hear this, Andy will say it, I will say it. We used to have a lot more discretion in our housing, and we used to be able to argue, it's our housing, it's our general plan, it's our zoning, the legislative body, which would be the council or the planning commission, you have a right to interpret that. All that interpretation and that deference is now gone. So we don't get to, say, oh well, it's we get to review it and we get to make those determinations.
So, but if your city agencies like fire and public works have made the determination that indeed it is has adverse effect, will that then be enough, or is it still questionable on whether?
Well, if it's based on some objective standard and some that you can point to, and that it is, and it does violate that.
Yeah, some of these laws have requirements now that say the objective standards have to be numerical or quantifiable. They have to be known in advance to the applicant and to anybody. In other words, anybody can just call the city and say, what is the objective standard for X, Y, or Z? And that's, that some
goes to
city
the
standards
checklist.
meet that and some probably don't.
Yeah, that goes also to the checklist too,
Yeah,
about
right.
everybody should be able to pull up what you're going to be held to. So, and Andy said it earlier, we still have CEQA. We don't have Coastal Act here, but CEQA can still apply to a Housing Accountability Act project. So,
I had a question about height. So you were talking, as just so that I can understand. So if we have a zone that we've identified, like no buildings over 2 stories, and someone comes in and everything, that the project is fine, everything, they meet all the requirements except for they want 3 stories. Now, because we already have guidelines and zoning and height requirements for that area, does that mean that it can be refused because it's outside of the scope of the guidelines of building in that area?
That's a kind of, it depends.
That's a segue to density.
Yeah, I was going to say, you're going to get me into density bonus. I was going to say, if you have 2 stories or 30 feet, that's subjective. You could deny on that, but I'll ruin your day. Density bonus law coming out in 1979. So that's when developers built affordable housing, and a certain percentage, then they get increased density over the maximum allowable residential density. It's a sliding scale depending on how much affordable, is it moderate, low, very low, and how many units. And what is the heart of density bonus is, we call them, the statute calls them concessions and incentives. And so the developer can apply for certain concessions or incentives, and that could be for height or maybe some, it's usually height and parking, but it has to result in an identifiable actual cost reduction. And the days before, years ago, the city put that burden on the applicant. And that burden, this is one of those changes, that burden is on the city. And the city needs to prove that it doesn't actually lead to an identifiable or actual cost reduction. The city can only require reasonable documentation and they also need to be able to prove that it is, it's now our burden. So that's for cost reduction, so they can get changes to the project because they need that third story because it's going to reduce the cost for providing affordable housing. It's all, you need it to provide affordable housing. Then density bonus law provides for waivers or modifications. And these are waivers or reductions in development standards. And the key there is it physically precludes the construction of an affordable project with density bonus. And this is where the front yard landscaping may be reduced because you need a bigger footprint, because you need more units. It can be setbacks. It can be a height waiver. And that is, it has to be shown that it physically, if you don't get it, it physically precludes the development of the project. And we can talk about some of the case law about density bonus and the waivers and the concessions.
Can I ask just to kind of clarify it in my mind? So correct me if I'm wrong. What you're saying is if somebody could build a 3-story, right, according to the zoning, but by saying if they build 5 stories, their incremental cost per unit is going to be such that they can charge that much less for rent, they could then be not denied the ability to have those 5 stories. Is that correct?
They would have to provide affordable housing units that would be restricted. They would have to say, I'm going to have 20% low income, and for that I need extra stories.
But it is feasible because the incremental cost of another floor compared to the entire site.
So, jurisdictions can deny concessions and incentives or waivers. And again, we're coming back to that adversely impact public health, safety, and also if it impacts a historic designated property. But as you see with Housing Accountability Act, density bonus law, you're going to see the city's ability to deny has to be based on these super findings, as I call them, and it's very difficult to make those findings.
What's the difference between a waiver and a variant? Is it the same sort of thing?
They can just ask for it, and good question. A developer coming in with an affordable housing project that's providing, a certain percentage, they get unlimited waivers, and the concessions are based on a certain percentage of the property of the project. There's been some changes where it's going to come up, but if you're near transit, you can get unlimited height if you're within a certain distance. But waivers are. Yeah, it would be like a variance, but you don't have to go through the variance process. And you get it automatically if you have a letter of justification showing I need a bigger footprint in front, so the front yard landscaping needs to go because I need that so I can provide for, more units.
So variance, okay, keep me honest. So variance would be more of like at the discretion of staff planning, but a waiver is part of the process. Like if you meet these requirements, you get these certain waivers.
Yeah, it would never really be seen as a variance because it's just part of the application as it goes through.
Right, but a variance would be at the discretion of staff. Like I need 2 more feet, or
No, it would be the staff would review it to see if it really is going to interfere with the physical construction. You would not go through a variance process with the density bonus project.
Right, I understand. Okay, at all. You would have no variance at all.
But you do have to justify.
Yeah, to clarify, a variance is a separate process which, to grant a variance, the city has to make certain findings of hardship and now it's not a special grant and all that kind of thing. And even then, you don't have to grant the variance. It's discretionary. These waivers, essentially, you don't have any control over. If somebody designs a project...
So one is discretion of staff and one is part of the process that you get. If you meet all these requirements, you can have you can enact that waiver as a developer.
The developer can require the city to grant the waiver, yes.
Yes.
Perfect, okay.
Right,
Yeah.
that's
When
correct.
it talks about cost reductions and needing additional stories to make a project pencil out, is that basically always just assumed that this is to the benefit of the developer? Because aren't a lot of the affordable housing projects pretty much publicly funded?
No, that's not really the Andy can chime in here too. It's very hard to put together a total 100% affordable project. They usually need state monies, grant monies, and other contributions from the local agency, like fee waivers. But for the developer to provide 20% or 15% of affordable units, that is a big impact, and that's why they want these concessions and incentives. They want a higher building, more units, because if they have more market rate units, that can also help provide for the affordable units. There has to be some sort of offset, and that's really what the density bonus is about, is providing how we get more affordable units and more housing. Is we have to have like the little carrot for the developer to, look, we'll give you, if you show that that's identifiable cost reduction. And it's pretty easy for them to do, I would say right now. But and then the waivers, they can just say, I can't provide all that parking because I can't physically put in all those units on this lot. So, and then there's in density bonus, there's a section that you can, for certain projects, you can waive the parking or have reduced parking. And that's under I always remember that one because it's a density bonus law and it's subsection P. So P for parking. I always remember that one. So anyway, it's density bonus it's like the Housing Accountability Act, the burden of proof, everything has shifted now for the city's burden. And years ago, people would ask for pro formas. They would really put the developer through a lot of hoops to try to really show, do you really need these concessions, incentives? I don't think there's many cities out there right now that are asking for pro formas, but actually just a letter from the developer saying, I need 2 stories of underground parking, and so I need a waiver from, some other regulations to allow that. And if it seems reasonable and makes sense, they grant them. Andy, do you have anything?
No, I think there can be a lot of question about what's a waiver, what's an incentive. For example, we had a senior affordable project, and a city, not Gilroy, had a requirement that the affordable units be dispersed within. In other words, the senior project was not all affordable. It was senior. There was a component of the overall project, let me put it this way, that was senior affordable. And the city had a requirement that they have to be dispersed. And the developer said, I can't do that. I'd violate federal law because the building requirements have to be different. If you have senior affordable units, you have to have a recreation room. There are various things. So I want an incentive or a waiver to allow me to build them all in one building rather than spread them throughout the project. So there can be a whole variety of issues that arise.
Yeah, and under density bonus law, what cities want, and they do want them to be the same size, shape, building type, and amenities as the affordable units need to match the market rate ones, and they also want them dispersed. They don't want all the affordable units to be the studios or the one bedroom on the bottom floor next to the parking lot and the trash cans. So no, it's actually built into the law that they need to be reasonably dispersed, and you need a mix of the 3-bedroom, 1-bedroom, and studios. So, I mean, it's all the things that people tried to do, or cities tried to say, okay, well, we're going to put all this over here, and then the developers would want to have their projects be more marketable. So. The one thing that I've heard is even with all these parking reductions, multifamily projects that are coming in now actually want some, they can not have any parking or they can have very reduced parking, but they put in parking because now parking is seen as an amenity.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just about to say that
Yeah.
so in a way, just spreading the affordable units all throughout a complex is beneficial because if the parking gets reduced, then you actually all the market rate potential tenants would be probably not want to move into that if it comes without parking, right? So,
Yeah.
so basically that the demand that's created from
And-
market rate paying tenants then takes care of
Yeah,
everybody.
and certain amenities, the local agency can't strip the amenities from the project.
Based on
Like rooftop garden or a rooftop deck area, because then they need height for the elevators and they need to go over 11 feet to provide this amenity. The local agency can't say, well, no, you don't need that amenity, you can meet the height, and they come in and say, no, it's actually an amenity for the tenants, and we need that. So
Yeah, cities are not allowed to redesign a project
Yeah.
to reduce the need for waivers, because there's an immediate temptation to try to do that, but
Yeah. Oh, you don't
court
need
cases
this.
are very
Yeah.
clear.
You don't need this interior courtyard, but it's an amenity for the
But
tenants.
subsequently, cities probably alter things once they've seen how things have been taken or abused. Or smart cities, I would think, would, to prevent those things, certain things in the future by putting that into zoning at each zoning.
That's a good theory, maybe.
Okay.
So can
I
I
admire
just,
your faith in city. I admire your faith in city planning.
so can I just ask a question here? We're sitting here listening. Basically, there's very little, if any, local control at this point. Can you give us an example of something that the city can do or can continue to do or has started to do that might try to balance this, for lack of better, power struggle kind of thing?
Coming up with, we'll get into checklists and stuff, but coming up with objective standards, design standards. I know we did do some here. And that's one way to keep some sort of design control, but it has to be, very, very objective. The project can't have, you can't deny it because it doesn't have the look and feel of Gilroy, or it doesn't have the, urban setting qualities, or we want wide front yards because that's the Gilroy look. You can't do that anymore, but you can have, you want certain restrictions for setbacks and for certain heights, and you can do that. But then with density bonus, those all can be modified. So.
And one more thing. I mean, the focus of this, rightly or wrongly, is that the city should be dealing with these issues at the general plan and zoning stages and the housing element stage, so that when someone comes in with an application, it's appropriate and it's in the right place, it's the right size and everything, and the city can approve it easily. So it's designed, I think, to try to prevent the cities from planning on the fly, on a project-by-project basis. The idea really is, if you have a general plan that has all the stuff it's supposed to have in it, and a housing and zoning law that implements it, and you have your objective design standards, then development, in theory, should be straightforward, in the sense that people should be able to know what are the requirements. If I want to build right here, what can I build here, and what do I have to do, and how can we get an approval relatively quickly? That's the concept. And again, Gilroy has done a very good job. We have a relatively new general plan. We're currently overhauling our zoning ordinance. We've adopted objective standards. So we're trying to really work within that framework as best we can.
And I appreciate that. But it sounds almost like, because, that your general plan, is not updated, it's you don't create a new general plan every year. You don't, all of this stuff. But it seems as if we're looking at just this year, what the state has put into play. So
it is a power struggle with
yeah,
the state.
because
There's no
we're
question.
kind of behind the 8 ball on
Yeah.
that, right? You
Yeah,
have to
that's
kind
true.
of almost anticipate when you create your general plan and you create your zoning laws.
Yeah. That is true. We don't disagree with you.
Yeah.
But we should move along.
Yeah, we should.
We could be here all night.
I know.
talking about this, but-
So, a new change to density bonus, I talked a little bit about it earlier, is the incentives for 100% affordable projects, and to include, very low vehicle travel areas, and Santa Clara County is in that urban county, it's designated. And so if you have a project in these areas, you're eligible for unlimited density and up to 3 additional stories.
What are very low vehicle travel areas?
They're designated in the density bonus law of certain urban counties, and Santa Clara County is listed. They're the highly impacted, or
For whatever reason, we are one of them.
we are.
So wait, I don't understand
Yeah, I
that.
don't
That
understand
means
what it
that
means,
we
very
don't
low.
have a lot of vehicle travel? Like to get to work?
That's what the statute, yes. And
So-
so if you're, and we can talk about it when we get into SB 330, but if you're building a project and you're within a certain certain half mile from a transit stop that's defined by the SB 330 and the other and density bonus as well, you get this unlimited density. If it's 100% affordable, you get unlimited density and up to 3 stories.
But
And
it
so
has to
they're
be-
trying to have projects with low VMT impacts.
I can appreciate that. So, but I just want to make sure I'm understanding this. It has to be within, I think in our case, it's a half a mile to a public transport
As defined,
as
yes.
defined. Okay, so it's not just anywhere.
No, it has to be a public transit stop, and that is defined by, a ride car, a shared car ride.
Yeah, it's defined by headways and bus lines meeting and things like
Yeah,
that.
and the rapid bus line that goes by every 15 minutes. It's all defined. So, but the one thing, and I know Andy always brings this up, is a shared parking space. We always wonder, what's a shared parking space, and how
Whoever gets there first.
Well, yeah, and how does it get designated, and what happens if it goes away after you've got your parking? Yeah. So anyway, it also clarifies how cities can implement density bonus, where density is calculated by floor area ratio, other than a set of number of units. So that was one of the recent amendments to density bonus law. So now we've got to keep moving here. So accessory dwelling units, the state has changed the statute several times. A few years ago, it was a real mess where they had 3 statutes that were you had to try to read one and see what this one said to this one and that. We did do an ADU ordinance that went to the state, and the state reviews them and sends back comments. And we went back and forth with the state, and we finally got an ADU ordinance that the state essentially approved. But in this last round for the housing element update, we got comments on our ADU ordinance, which I believe most cities did, even though we sent it up to HCD for their review. I know you talk to planners, and they say, our ordinance, it was okay with this one HCD PERS planner. The next time we submitted it, we got someone else, and they looked at the standards differently. And so it was just sort of, with ADU ordinances, it was just sort of who you got at HCD to review them. But the state's making ADUs easier. They're doing ministerial approvals, and they're defined, and there's ADUs, there's also JADUs, and they're defined by size. And then the city can impose standards as long as they're consistent with the state requirements about parking height, setbacks, architectural review, unit size, historic preservation. But again, they have to be objective. So, but there's, I think HCD is looking for some of these ADU ordinances that want the ADU to look compatible with the main structure and things like that. And I think they're doing comments on that, like they don't like that. It's too subjective. They're limited to a 60-day approval timeline, and ADUs, for everybody's benefit, they count towards our RENA numbers. So, and I think out of all the changes in the laws recently, the ADUs and making ADUs ministerial, making them easier to approve, you're seeing a lot more ADUs. I mean, people are getting these units in their backyards. New construction is including ADUs. I know in my neighborhood, all the tear-downs and rebuilds all have ADUs in their backyards.
So do those have to be then, I mean, how do they, a lot of these ADUs that are going in are not being designated as low income.
They don't have to be. They can't. We can't deed restrict them anymore for low income. They used to be able to, but they removed that requirement.
But they do count against the ratio.
It's housing of any kind.
And they're really what people call affordable by design, because they're typically small units, and therefore, if they're in the rental market, presumably rent for less money.
Has the city thought about, maybe in the next update, to encourage folks that have sort of unsanctioned ADUs?
Oh, that was already in the first round of the statute, where you had 5 years to bring them into compliance.
Because I would imagine that's going to increase the numbers as well. Because I'm sure
the illegal granny units can get some time to bring them to code, but the one thing with ADUs is, and bringing the older units into code, is they still have to comply with health and safety and building permits. Those are, if you have illegal gas lines, or you don't have the wiring's not to code, or certain fire safety issues, they want to at least make them safe. So, all right, I got to move on here. Okay, we're now housing. SB 330, the Housing Crisis Act, it came out in 2019, and this was what Andy was referring to earlier, is you have a preliminary application, and it applies to residential mixed use with 2/3 residential, transitional or supportive housing, but a housing development project, even under Housing Accountability Act, included mixed use with 2/3 residential. So there's similar definitions throughout Density Bonus, Housing Accountability Act, and now we call it SB 330. When you submit your preliminary application, it freezes rules and policy in effect at the time that application is submitted. That is huge for a developer. There's a checklist, and in the government code, it's the HCD checklist, or the city can do its own checklist, but it has to contain everything that's in the government code for SB 330, and you can't add to it. You can't put other requirements in it, so it really is restrictive. Completion of this checklist and payment of the fee makes the application deemed complete. And here, this is what Andy was talking about earlier. It limits the request for additional information after the application is submitted. So that 30-day turnaround, I remember years ago, day 29, the developer would get another incomplete letter. Then you answer those questions. You submit it. 29 days later, you get a whole nother request. And God forbid, if your planner left the city and you got a new planner, then it was like Groundhog Day. They're finding all sorts of different things, and it really did prevent housing being developed as quickly as it could be. And that's kind of the theme in all these statutes. Provide housing and make it not so difficult.
Does this put extra pressure on staff? Or does it simplify?
I think it simplifies it. I don't know. I don't want to. Yeah, because you have your checklist, and it does make it more formula, and and you want to make sure that you provide the comments in the time period, and then later you have the checklist, and then you also have compliance or conformity with the other regulations. But this limits that additional information, but you can still ask for CEQA information. And so after the preliminary application, a formal application, after it's been the preliminary has been deemed complete, the applicant can submit a formal application within 180 days, and that's reviewed under conformity with the zoning and the planning and everything. But the checklist is what starts it off, and you're checking the zoning, you're checking the general plan, all of that. And then on top of all of this, you have the 5 hearing rule. And this includes study session, appeals, continuances. It doesn't apply to a developer-held study session, not yet. But if the city does a study session, like the Planning Commission, that's one hearing. I know some jurisdictions have Planning Commission, and they also have like a traffic, complete streets, BPAC or something that the housing projects would go through before it got to planning. Those agencies are now holding joint meetings so it can go to their BPAC and their PC at the same meeting, because you're going to run out of fingers real soon with that. So, and there is a remedy if we looked at that if you get to the 5th meeting, there's a remedy that you can do, but I don't think cities have gotten, I don't know of anybody that's gotten to the 5 hearings. Andy, do you?
No, it's a little unknown exactly what will happen if you sort of mistakenly have an extra hearing. And I don't know,
yeah, there's that 60-day, you have to appeal it. And
yeah, it's unclear what will really happen, but I think it's mainly, it sort of exhorts the city to be prompt and not have hearing after hearing, and not send projects back and forth between the council and the planning commission, as some cities have been known to do.
Oh yeah, a lot of cities, if the council it was approval at planning commission, got appealed to council, and then council said, oh, we're going to do this, and then they said, oh, but planning commission hasn't seen that, so you go back to planning commission, and then planning commission holds like 3 hearings and denies it, and then you appeal it back up. Some cities' projects took 2 and 3 years just to get an approval. So it's, the SB 330 has restrictions on city planning. There's no more numerical growth controls, and some of you may know or may not know about the RDO, the city's residential development ordinance. Morgan Hill had some measures, and they were done by initiative. Our RDO was an ordinance, and those can't be enforced anymore. And then there's no moratoria for planning studies. Years ago, you could do a planning or a moratorium to freeze in, no more applications, because you're going to go study something in your general plan or study something in your zoning to fix it or amend it, but you didn't want projects coming through until it was decided. But you can't do that anymore. I mean, I have done, moratorium ordinances about studying, like, if there's a problem with office parking, because some projects came in and then people were complaining about it, and the legislative body wanted to stop any projects from coming in until they get the parking study. But you can't do that anymore. So there is still the moratoria for health and safety and welfare. That would be, you can have a moratorium on, water, the water isn't available, or the sewer treatment plant can't take any more houses or any more impacts to the sewer. That's truly the health and safety. There's no downzoning, and so the city has to maintain the residential density as of January 18. And this law was adopted in the fall of 18, but the legislature even backed it up because they knew agencies were like, they knew this bill might pass, so they were going and trying to downzone in advance of this statute. So again, they said, no, we're going to slap your hand and you're not going to try to out-trick us. So anyway, it's just this legislation just keeps getting more and more focused. And downzoning includes FAR, floor area ratio, height, new or increased open space, or lot size. So before SB 330 came out, trying to, have mandatory, greater mandatory open space in multifamily projects, or, lot sizes, you couldn't do that if it was before January, if it was after January of 18. It has a very complicated replacement housing and no net loss requirement. It's very, very complicated. We don't have an Ellis Act ordinance, and we don't have inclusionary, not yet. But SB 330 is on top of any other rent control or Ellis Act type projects. So it's on top of all of that. Now it's Andy.
Okay. We're going to try to buzz through the rest of this quickly because I think we're taking, it's good. We're getting a lot of questions. We really appreciate it. And we could talk all night. I want to talk briefly about SB 9, not because it's going to come to you, SB 9 projects. They're not designed to. But it got a lot of play when it was adopted in 2021 because people thought SB 9 was the end of single-family zoning, and in fact, that was the point of it. The point of it by people in the state, particularly Scott Wiener of San Francisco, was to end single-family zoning, which other places, Berkeley has done, and places Portland has done in Oregon, some other communities have done. So Jolie mentioned that ADUs seem to be very prevalent and really are helping with the housing crisis. Everybody thought SB 9 would, but so far it really hasn't, as far as we can tell. But I want to just tell you about it a little bit. So SB 9 has two components. One component is that if somebody has a single-family lot, let's say it's just a bare lot, they can build two houses on it now, not one, two. Or if they have one house on the lot and physically there's enough room, they can build a second one. Second is that there is something called urban lot splits, which is that if you have a single-family lot, subject to certain requirements, you can cut it in two, and you have two lots. And you can build two houses on each of those. It doesn't apply to all land, and there are some exceptions, but it applies to a lot. So the two-unit development, the 2 units would be approved ministerially. That means staff approvals, no CEQA. They must comply with objective standards. And again, they can only be denied if the jurisdiction can make specific health and safety findings, not just it's too crowded or we don't like it or there isn't enough parking. It has to be more severe than that. The urban lot split, again, is a ministerial thing. In other words, the lots can be split simply at the staff level. There are restrictions I mentioned here. The owner has to agree to no short-term rentals and that 1 unit will be owner-occupied for 3 years. 1 unit on the new lot, assuming it's built. It's a little peculiar. I think that requirement's going to go away, frankly. I don't think that's going to last.
Attorney Faber?
Yes. What?
Commissioner Ellie had a question.
I had a question.
Oh, sorry, I didn't say it here.
So I thought I read that duplexes aren't allowed in Gilroy. Is this like basically why? Because it's like two properties on one?
Well, we could be required to approve a duplex under SB 9.
Yeah.
What? Yeah, we do have
them. Okay, so maybe I was reading some old...
No, they are allowed, and we can be forced to approve one on a single-family lot under SB 9 as well.
Oh, okay, thank you.
There are requirements. For example, the smaller lot must be... The lots have to be sort of equal size, but not exactly. 40, 60 is okay. And the smaller lot has to be at least 1,200 square feet. Well, if you multiply that by 2, that's only 2,400, so it's kind of small for 2 lots.
So when you say that,
Yes.
do the setbacks on the sides no longer apply then?
There are setbacks, but the setbacks cannot preclude somebody building a small house on the lot. So you can require setbacks, but not enough that would prevent the development. So,
Okay,
well, on a 2,400-foot lot, it might not be a lot of setbacks, obviously, but other lots could be more.
So theoretically, somebody, I buy a lot, I'm going to buy a home, but it's an older home. Instead of remodeling it, updating it, I just graze it. And I build 2 homes now on this lot.
Yeah? What's the question?
So that's what can happen.
That can happen, yes.
Okay.
Or somebody could build a second home, if there's room on the lot, to add it to the one that's already there.
Is that a limit?
Pardon me?
Is that a limit? How many units?
Well, that's the next slide here. And there's some ambiguity in the law. Generally speaking, the limit is 4 units on your old lot, including potentially a JADU or an ADU. Actually, HCD is reading the law now to say somebody could build 6 units. I don't read it that way, but that's what they say, so we'll see where that goes. It's kind of complicated when you actually try to parse through and figure out what you can do, but it's pretty clear that, in theory, with 1 lot, if you split it, you can build 4 houses. And parking, Jolie mentioned that the state is reducing parking requirements. You can require 1 off-street space per unit. And here's the thing she was talking about. This is a similar requirement to SB 330 and other places. So no off-street parking can be required if the property is located within a half mile of a high-quality transit corridor or major transit stop. Again, these are defined terms. Or within 1 block, and this is not a shared space, of a car share vehicle. Well, I guess. It's a little unclear. What would that mean? Does that mean there's a space on the curb that's painted some color so a zip car can park there? And what do you do if you build your unit without parking and then they take that car share vehicle away tomorrow? These are odd requirements because they're transitory. What's a high-quality transit corridor today might change tomorrow because it can depend on how many buses come down the corridor. So anyway, I want to just let you know about SB 9. We haven't gotten SB 9. Do we have any? One application in 2 years, so it's not. But we have seen them in other cities. However, one of the reasons you don't see them is for a homeowner to say, "I want to split my lot," he becomes a developer. You have to have a civil engineer, and you have things. You have to deal with the city. You have to pay fees. So it's not just a trivial thing for an average homeowner to do. Okay, there's something called SB 10. I'm going to skip over. It allows certain upzonings. It's not something that we've seen so far in Gilroy, so I'm going to ignore it. SB 6.
We have something in our housing element from SB 10. We do have something really in the SB 10 with the fourplexes, right, for corner units. And
I think we do, but
okay.
I don't know if we've done it, and I'm not sure what it actually says. But yes, okay. There's another SB, and that's SB 6 and AB 2011. I don't want to get into the details, but they allow essentially certain kinds of residential properties to be built on commercial zoned property without changing the zoning. So, for example, AB 2011, that only relates to 100% affordable projects on commercially zoned property. They're exempt from CEQA. You can have greater heights. Prevailing wages are required. This is part of the compromise, I guess, that the state made with the unions to get these laws passed. SB 6 is related. I've underlined the word residential because these don't have to be affordable. On the other hand, these require union labor, not just prevailing wage. The statutes don't actually say union labor, but they say a skilled and trained workforce, which is a kind of synonym for it. So these are applications I think we are going to start seeing because we've heard of developers and talked to developers even who are interested in doing these in other cities as well. And the idea that you don't have to change the zoning is very helpful to a developer, of course. Okay, we're going to finish with a discussion of conflicts of interest. Jolie, since I'm standing, why don't I do the Levine part and then give it back to you?
Well, I was going to say we could skip the conflict.
Or we can skip this if you like.
Already, I think Levine's more.
Okay, let's skip the FPPC conflicts. That deals with your owning property near sites. Okay, Levine Act. This is this is an act that is not new but was recently amended. And it prevents you from accepting certain contributions over $250. We'll explain a little more in the next slide. And it used to apply only to one category of people, and that was a category of planning commissioners who ran for council and lost. This is a peculiar category to worry about, actually, but nonetheless, that was the group. Because it can happen, it does happen, because it did not apply to elected officials. So what it basically says, it applies to contributions of over $250 from either a party, who could be an applicant, or it could be someone who's opposing the project, or it could be a friend. But it has to be somebody who has a financial interest. So that could be a neighbor, for example, who's opposing the project. And what it basically says is if you have received a contribution of over $250 from one of these people, then in the 12 months before something comes to you, you can't vote on it. You have to recuse yourself. So you have to think back. Here's an applicant, like here's the guy with the ANS. Now, did they give you $250 within the last year? I mean, this is a lot of record keeping and thought. That's what the statute now says. And it now applies to sitting planning commissioners. The point is before it didn't. It applied to I take it back. It applies to sitting planning commissioners, but you're not accepting contributions unless you're running for something. That's what I meant by it only applies if you accept contributions, but you end up back on the planning commission because you lost the race. Okay? But it applies to any planning commissioner who accepts political contributions, and it applies to council members. So if the planning commissioner runs for council and wins, then that's a problem then, and they still have to worry about the fact that they got contributions within the last year. Furthermore, you can't ask for new contributions for another year from people that you've dealt with on entitlements. That's the second bullet point here. And there are complicated provisions that in theory allow somebody to cure a violation, but so this is pretty strange, and it may mean that developers will use this to say, sorry, I can't give you contributions anymore, it's too complicated. Or it could even mean, by the way, that a developer might decide, if there's a planning commissioner running for council, to give them a larger contribution to try to disqualify them in case they get to council and win. That could happen. I don't want to be cynical about this, but there are games that could be played. So, okay. That's the end of our presentation then. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for your interesting questions. It's always more fun when people have questions. Are there any more? Or have we worn you out?
So many questions.
Okay. Feel free to, you know where to reach us. We're easy to reach by email. I'm happy to talk to anybody. Our pleasure.
Thank you. All right, moving on. 7.2, Planning Commission Annual Presentation to Council. Draft will be provided, and here comes the draft.
I know, right?
All right, good evening, commissioners. So passed out the handouts. And Cindy and I are going to kind of tag team on this one. I know it's a little bit late, but I think we should be able to go over this pretty quickly. Scheduling-wise, Planning Commission is scheduled to make an annual presentation to the City Council on November 20th. So this is kind of our first draft to the Commission, and then we'll come back again the first meeting in November, and then, we can finalize that. And the chair will be the one presenting on behalf of the Commission to the City Council. So this is, of course, just giving an overview to Council about this body and when you meet, and then here's a list of all of your names. And then this is what we wanted to focus on tonight. So we looked at this past year and kind of highlight your major actions and activities. So last year's presentation, we started drafting that in September. So basically, it kind of, through end of September is where that ended. So we kind of picked this back up from October last year, through now. So of course, the Planning Commission considered the draft housing element, provided great feedback to staff. And as you heard earlier, we did get HCD certification. And then this is in May this year, so just a few months ago, you considered the Gilroy Crossing Phase 2 project. That's the one that's south of 152, east of Highway 101, kind of that location that's east of the Target Shopping Center. There's a drive-through restaurant, gas station, 2 hotels, 2 future industrial buildings, and I have a slide later that expands on that. And then Royal Way Townhomes. This is one you considered in October last year. That's why I was kind of giving you that timeline. Last year's presentation to council, we kind of finished through September. So even though it might seem like a little bit old, but we didn't get to present that to council last year. And you just considered the architectural and site review for those 2 industrial projects. So we could add additional expanded slides on this, if you like, since that did get approved tonight. And Planning Commission also considered this subdivision applications for Gilroy Crossing Commercial, and that just very recently. And same thing with the Church Street, that was a 3-lot subdivision. The Gilroy Crossing one, that was a 7-lot subdivision. And several months ago, you also considered the Plaza Allium 10th and Chestnut sign program amendment. And last but not least, you've done lots of training. I really appreciate all of your input and questions, and just also helping staff in looking at a lot of these policies and procedures. So yeah, you've had training on roles, policies, meeting procedures, land use, and then tonight, housing. So this is the slide I was talking about, the Gilroy Crossing Phase 2 project that you considered in May, and you recommended approval to City Council, and Council subsequently did approve this in June. And then this is that Royal Way Townhomes, the Commissioner.
Add the address to that, since you have the address on the Gilroy Crossing space?
Oh, here? You mean on this slide?
No, one back. Go.
Royal Way?
On the Royal Way Townhomes.
Oh, on this one?
Yeah.
Yes, yeah, we can definitely do that. Just make it consistent.
Yeah.
Yes.
And it helps kind of to...
Yes, thank you. Yes, so this is, you considered October last year, 45 townhomes in 11 buildings. This is kind of on the south side of the city, next to Gilroy High School. And this went to council also based on Planning Commission recommendation, and it was approved by council subsequently. And as I mentioned, the 2 projects approved tonight, which is bullet point 4, we can create slides similar to these 2 for each of those projects. We didn't do that for this draft, but we'll bring that back for the November
I'm
draft.
thinking what about the housing, I think it was townhomes too for 6th Street?
There were.
I think the address was 706th Street.
We split a lot up into 4. That's the one you're talking about?
No,
Is
I'm
that
talking about the
4
one,
houses?
it's pretty close to City Hall. It used to be a...
Yeah, I think that was last summer. I want to say
Has it been that long?
August. Yeah.
Oh, my goodness.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
The medical center?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, the one, on 6th, I know, and Prince. Prince
Oh,
yeah.
right, yeah.
Yeah, I think it was August last year.
Across from Wheeler.
Yes.
Okay.
Kind of diagonal, yeah.
Oh, it doesn't feel like it was that long ago.
I know, time flies.
Yeah.
Is this only for things that you have approved as a body, or the things that you denied
No,
doing here
this
as well?
just
When was the digital
activities.
signage?
Yeah, the electronic.
When was digital
sign,
signage?
The digital signage.
Yeah, we can add that, it was,
That was a pretty
it was-
big to
that was a
do,
big-
I think.
yeah, it was a big
I think
issue.
That probably would be noteworthy.
Yeah, sure. Yes, we can add all of that. And that's why we kind of want to just
Is
talk.
it inappropriate to include the staff's, staff has done so much this past year that I feel like the whole dynamic of Planning Commission has changed. That, the way the packets are put together, the way the meetings are run. I mean, staff has really, they've done a lot of work. I don't know if that's appropriate to include.
I think that's going to be up to the commission, and, you know,
I
chair
think
to present.
that would be nice for the chair when he delivers the presentation to make some comments about how impactful it was and time consuming and
Yeah, and still time consuming because it's all being like some of this is still being done by hand, but. I just appreciate
But
a
some
lot
kudos
changed.
for staff and
Yeah.
So I
Well,
think
thank
that
you.
the
We appreciate
staff-
that.
The staff has been responsive to our requests, yeah.
Yeah, yes, we have been working hard on anything we can do to help streamline, and so thank you for that. And here is kind of looking forward to 2024. We listed some of the things we know will be taking forward to the commission. Zoning co-update, that will be a pretty major undertaking, and after and then that will be hopefully be adopted in 2024, and of course there will be various land use projects as we work with applicants and things get to the point, and of course we'll be taking those to you. And as far as planning commission training, we'll be collaborating with Jolie. Our team will be we're thinking maybe something like objective design standards, and there'll be other things we'll be able to do training on also. And of course, continue to give you the opportunities regarding outside training that we send to you via email and tell you about it at the meeting also.
little off topic, but just brought up a question, objective design standards. Is that something that gets reviewed every few years? Is there a cycle to it, or would we have to
I think so, but I think it was just adopted in 2021, right? Fairly recently?
So yeah, it is something that we can change. We don't have to, but if you find that as you're reviewing projects that it's not working the way that you think it should have been intended or should be, then we can look at revising it. That obviously that would have to go to the city council.
Right. I was thinking, yes, it was recent, but there have been a slew of changes in housing law that has happened in the meantime. So maybe in that context, doing a review. I'm not saying that necessarily that we need to change anything, but just kind of look at this again now with the new constraints that are being put on decision making, whether it's at the staff level or planning commission.
So as part of your training, what we could do is go through the standards that were adopted, and if you have questions about the standards, if you think that something needs to be tweaked, then we can talk about it.
Okay, great.
If I may interrupt, my suggestion would be that maybe we treat that on a case-by-case basis, because the main thing in the housing laws is to have them. And so now that we have them, that's really what the housing laws require. And if we find out in the process of looking at individual projects that at some point something doesn't seem quite right, we can look at it. But I don't think normally cities update those as a routine matter.
Okay.
Unless necessary, or they somehow get so outmoded.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I heard we're going to add the billboard ordinance denial, and then we're going to add the address to the Royal Way homes. Is there anything else that we left out that you'd like to see on the presentation?
The two projects from today.
And the two projects tonight?
Yep. And then something on staff.
Love for staff.
Okay.
Yes. So
Thanks.
maybe a picture of everybody.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Yeah, I might have to let you come up with that slide. Feels a little strange for us to come up with it, but yeah.
Can we put the name of the engineers too and the developer, so we know the company? Sometimes the company,
The applicant?
yes, and the engineers too, because I think it's good to get know them at least by name. So I think we can kind of, is it the same way that you guys and everybody's kind of like get to know us a little bit, how we are functioning as this group, maybe eventually when we see another engineer or the same engineer with another project, it kind of, I think it just refresh our mind to have that data there.
This is for the city council.
Yeah, why not?
Are you talking the engineer for the city?
No, for the city. For the project.
Applicant?
For the applicant, for the project. Yeah, because that's very common when we do the drawings. When we revise the drawings, you always go by the engineer. Oh, okay, I know. You kind of know them. You get to know them, like how they function. Like,
Yes, but we probably should not be taking those kinds of things into consideration because that would be some type of bias potentially, right? Anyway.
Yeah, we can take a look at that and see how that's going to look on the slides in terms of, developer or applicant name, and just to come back with the draft next time. All right. Any other feedback?
Love the new pens.
That would be a bullet point.
Thank you, Sharon.
All right, thank you.
All right, moving on to 8 informational items. The Planning Division staff approvals, and I think there's only one item.
I could stay here, yeah. Any questions?
No questions. Planning Division report.
Let me just log in real quick. The city clerk's office has scheduled it's really, of course, from city council, but there's a commission and volunteer appreciation dinner on November 9th from 6 to 8 p.m. at Old City Hall. And I believe the invitation went out yesterday afternoon. So please check your inbox and do your RSVP by November 2nd and put that on your calendar, November 9th. And yeah, if you wanted to add anything else, Ty.
We'd love for you to all come.
I went last year. It was really fun.
I went last year and I left hungry because I talked with staff because I said, should I have dinner first because I'm vegan? And no, we can provide you a vegan dinner. And there was no vegan dinner for me, so I left because it was. I said, okay, I can't.
I can answer that question because now that we're in Old City Hall, they can cater to vegans. I have to get that information ahead of time, so please RSVP.
It was ahead of time.
No,
and it
for
was confirmed.
this meet, for this one here particularly, we will have vegan options. So basically, all I have to ask
is not vegan. Just to make sure, because
I will make sure that if we have a vegan, we will make sure
Okay,
to have a
thank you.
vegan option there.
Well, thank you. So yes, look for your email yesterday afternoon around 2 p.m. and RSVP. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sharon. 10, Assistant City Attorney City Attorney report.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, so
I don't think so.
So on November 6th, it's a Monday, we will be presenting an introduction to the City Council on upcoming proposal to have an inclusionary ordinance. This was something that the council looked at a couple of years ago, and it's part of the housing element. So we'll be doing an introduction on inclusionary policies. And then there will also be a community workshop the following day, Tuesday. Both of these meetings start at 6 p.m. and both will be here at the top of chambers.
Thank you. All right, 10, City Attorney report.
You want to talk housing some more? I think we have no report, but thank you very much for your attention during the training. We appreciate it.
All right, with that, I thank everybody for coming, and we're adjourning to November 2nd, 2023. Thank you.
Thank you.